When a cold, arrogant CEO humiliates a grease-stained aircraft mechanic in a storm-battered airport, she has no idea this man holds all the power to determine the fate of her multi-million-dollar deal. Even more than that, he's the aerospace genius the entire world thought had disappeared. A tension-filled encounter that will forever change both their lives. Follow until the end, hit like, and comment the name of the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story has traveled. Victoria Hale's heels clicked against the scarred linoleum of Mercer Regional Airport like gunshots in the quiet terminal. Each step was deliberate, measured, the walk of someone who'd spent 15 years forcing the world to bend around her schedule. Outside the wall of windows, rain hammered the tarmac in sheets, turning the single runway into a black river that reflected the strobing emergency lights of her grounded Gulf Stream. Unacceptable. The word left her mouth cold and flat as she pressed her phone tighter to her ear. I don't care what the weather report says, Marcus. The Takahashi Group lands in Chicago in 7 hours. If I'm not there to close this deal personally, 18 months of negotiations disappear. Her assistant's voice crackled through the speaker, tinny with stress. Ms. Hale, I've contacted every certified aviation service within 200 miles. The storm's got everything grounded. Even if someone could get here, then find someone uncertified. Victoria's reflection stared back at her from the rain-streaked glass. Severe black suit, hair pulled into a knot so tight it could crack walnuts, expression carved from granite. I didn't build Hale Dynamics by accepting limitations. She ended the call without waiting for a response. Limitations were for other people. The airport's interior had the desperate, fluorescent sadness of a place built in the 80s and abandoned by progress. Faded posters advertised rental car companies that no longer existed. The coffee in the vending machine probably predated her company's IPO. Victoria's mouth tightened. This was what happened when you let a regional sales meeting run long, when you trusted a local recommendation for a charming bed and breakfast instead of staying in Kansas City proper. Inefficiency compounded by sentiment. She'd fix both problems once she was airborne. A door marked Maintenance, Authorized Personnel Only swung open with a rusty squeal. Victoria's gaze snapped toward it, searching for whoever was supposed to be getting her plane operational again. Instead, a man emerged who looked like he'd been assembled from spare parts at a junkyard. He was tall, but carried himself with a kind of comfortable slouch that suggested he'd never worried about making an impression. His coveralls were the indeterminate color of old motor oil, streaked with grease and what might have been hydraulic fluid. Dark hair fell past his collar, shot through with premature gray. He needed a shave 3 days ago. When he looked up from the tablet he was carrying, his eyes were an unsettling shade of gray-blue. Too sharp, too focused for someone who looked like he'd been sleeping in his truck. You Hale. His voice had the flat vowels of the rural Midwest, the kind of accent Victoria associated with diners and gas stations. She drew herself to full height, which in heels put her eye level with his collarbone. I am Miss Hale, yes. And you are? Daniel Cross. He didn't offer his hand, just shifted the tablet to tuck it under one arm. Airport manager says your Gulfstream's got electrical problems. That's what I'm paying certified technicians to determine. Victoria's tone could have flashed frozen boiling water. Are you with the maintenance crew I requested? Something that might have been amusement flickered across his weathered features. I'm the maintenance crew. Only one on duty once the storm rolled in. I specifically requested someone qualified to work on executive aircraft. Lady, you're in Mercer, Kansas. We've got one mechanic certified for crop dusters and me. Storm's got the certified guy stuck on the other side of a washed-out bridge. Daniel's gaze drifted past her to the windows, assessing the weather with the casual expertise of someone who'd spent his life reading skies. You want to wait 6, maybe 8 hours for the water to go down? That's your business. Your plane's still going to be broken either way. Victoria's jaw clenched so hard her molars ached. And what exactly are your qualifications? Enough to know your starboard generator's probably throwing fault codes from a corrupted flight management system, which is why your backup power distribution isn't switching over clean. He said it the way someone might comment on the weather, utterly matter of fact. She blinked. It took her a moment to process that he'd just diagnosed, with disturbing accuracy, the exact problem her pilots had described before they disappeared into the terminal's sad little restaurant. That's How would you know that without even accessing the diagnostics? Daniel's expression didn't change. Gulfstream G6500s have a specific failure pattern when moisture gets into the avionics bay through a faulty environmental seal. Happens more than it should. You were probably flying through heavy weather earlier today, yeah? We encountered turbulence over Oklahoma. Victoria heard herself answer before she'd decided to. Something about his certainty had bypassed her usual defenses. Then her brain caught up with her mouth, and she straightened, reasserting control. That doesn't mean I'm letting some local mechanic who works on Cessnas anywhere near a $40 million aircraft. $65 million. Daniel's correction was mild. Assuming you've got the extended range package and the enhanced vision system. And I don't work on Cessnas anymore. Anymore? Victoria seized on the word like a prosecutor spotting a contradiction. So you admit you're not currently qualified for... I said I don't work on them anymore. Didn't say I wasn't qualified. He pulled out his phone with grease-stained fingers, tapped the screen a few times, then held it out to her. Your call, Ms. Hale. You can wait for the bridge to clear and miss whatever meetings got you wound up tight enough to vibrate. Or you can let me take a look and maybe get you back in the air before midnight. Victoria stared at the phone's screen. It displayed what appeared to be a valid FAA maintenance certificate, along with a string of ratings and type certifications that read like alphabet soup to her untrained eye. But what caught her attention was the small print at the bottom. The issue date was less than a year old, but the original certification date went back almost 2 decades. This says your rating covers commercial aircraft up to... She stopped, recalculating. Why is someone with these qualifications working at a regional airport in the middle of nowhere? For the first time, something shifted behind Daniel's neutral expression. Not quite defensiveness, but a wall sliding into place. That's my business. Question is whether you want your plane fixed or not. Every instinct Victoria had developed through years of boardroom battles screamed at her that this didn't add up. People with commercial aviation expertise didn't just appear in rural Kansas, covered in grease and looking like they'd given up on ambition sometime around the turn of the century. It was wrong, suspicious, probably dangerous to trust, but the Takahashi deal was worth $73 million, and she had 6 hours. Fine. The word tasted like surrender, which made her hate it. But I'm watching every move you make. One mistake, one single indication that you're in over your head, and you're done. Understood? Daniel's mouth quirked, not quite a smile, more like he was biting back something he knew better than to say out loud. Understood. Plane's this way. He led her through a side exit that opened directly onto the tarmac. The wind hit them like a living thing, cold and vicious, carrying rain that stung exposed skin. Victoria's carefully constructed appearance disintegrated in seconds, her suit jacket plastered to her shoulders, her hair whipping free of its pins, mascara probably running in black streaks down her cheeks. Daniel didn't seem to notice the weather. He walked with the easy stride of someone unbothered by discomfort, heading straight for the Gulfstream's forward access panel. When he reached the aircraft, he produced a ruggedized tablet from some pocket in his coveralls and plugged it into a maintenance port Victoria hadn't even known existed. How did you know that was there? She had to shout over the wind. It's where they always put it on the G650. He was already scrolling through cascading data, his expression focused with the kind of intensity she usually only saw in surgical theaters or war rooms. Huh. Worse than I thought. Victoria's stomach dropped. What does that mean? Means you've got a corrupted primary flight computer and the backup's trying to compensate but can't sync with the corrupted data architecture. If your pilots had tried to take off, you'd have lost all flight control automation about 30 seconds after wheels up. He didn't look up from the screen. You'd have been flying a $65 million glider. The casual way he described a scenario that could have killed everyone aboard made Victoria's blood run cold. My pilots are experienced professionals. They would have... Your pilots are good at flying planes that work right. They're not engineers. Daniel's fingers moved across the tablet with surprising dexterity for someone whose hands looked like they'd been through a wood chipper. This kind of failure doesn't show up on standard pre-flight diagnostics. You need to know what you're looking for. And you know what you're looking for. Yeah. He finally glanced at her, and in that moment Victoria saw something that didn't match the rest of his carefully cultivated nobody appearance. Intelligence. Deep, bone-level expertise. The kind of understanding that came from years of training and experience, not from reading manuals. I know exactly what I'm looking for. She watched him work for another 2 minutes, growing increasingly uneasy as she realized she couldn't follow most of what he was doing. The tablet's display showed schematics and code that meant nothing to her, but Daniel navigated through them like he'd designed the system himself. His movements had the unconscious precision of muscle memory. No hesitation, no checking reference materials, just smooth competence that suggested he'd done this particular job 1,000 times before. "Who are you?" The question escaped before Victoria could stop it. Daniel's hands paused for a fraction of a second. When he answered, his voice was carefully neutral. "I'm the guy fixing your plane." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer you're getting." He disconnected the tablet and moved to the access panel, his fingers already working the release catches with practiced ease. "I need to get into the avionics bay. Gonna be about 45 minutes to reload the primary flight computer from clean backup firmware and resync the whole system. You can wait inside where it's dry. I told you I'm watching every move. Suit yourself." He popped the panel open, revealing a dense nest of wiring and circuit boards that looked impossibly complex. "But you're going to get soaked." Victoria set her jaw and stayed exactly where she was, arms crossed, despite the rain running down her neck and soaking through her silk blouse. She'd built her company by refusing to blink first, by never showing weakness even when she was terrified. This was no different, except it was different because she was standing in a storm watching a man who should have been a nobody disassemble her aircraft's brain with the confidence of someone who'd done it in his sleep. Every move he made was economical, purposeful. He didn't waste motion or second-guess himself. Even when he encountered a particularly stubborn connector, he just shifted his grip and applied pressure at a different angle, and it yielded like he'd known exactly how it would respond. "You've worked on Gulfstreams before," Victoria said. It wasn't a question. "Worked on lots of things before." Daniel had both hands buried in the wiring now, his face illuminated by the blue-white glow of the aircraft's emergency lighting. "Most people have a before. Most people don't end up working night maintenance at rural airports when they're clearly qualified for significantly better positions." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Maybe I like it here." "Nobody likes it here. This place is dying. Half the businesses on the main street are boarded up. The airport probably loses money every quarter, and the only reason you're even here tonight is because everyone else found an excuse to leave." Victoria heard her own voice getting sharper, more cutting, the tone she used in negotiations when she wanted to put someone on their heels. "So what happened? You lose your license? Criminal record? Drinking problem?" Daniel pulled his hands free of the wiring and turned to face her fully. The rain plastered his hair to his skull, made his coveralls cling to his frame, but his expression was utterly controlled. When he spoke, each word was precise and deliberate. "I had a daughter who needed me more than I needed a career. That's what happened." He held her gaze for 3 long seconds. "Now, unless you've got technical questions about the repair, I'd appreciate it if you'd let me work." The words hit Victoria like a slap. Not because they were angry, they weren't. They were simply final, a door closing with quiet certainty. She opened her mouth to push back, to reassert control of the conversation, then stopped, because she'd seen his hands shake, just for a second, when he'd said daughter. Just the slightest tremor in his fingers before he'd clenched them and turned back to the aircraft. Most people wouldn't have noticed. But Victoria had spent 15 years learning to read body language in high-stakes negotiations, and she knew what involuntary physical responses meant. Pain. Old pain, the kind that didn't heal, just scarred over. She stepped back without consciously deciding to, giving him space she hadn't intended to offer. "How long?" "I said 45 minutes. "That's not what I'm asking." Daniel was silent for a long moment, his hands moving through the wiring with mechanical precision. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet she almost missed it under the drumming rain. 8 years. She's 15 now. Victoria did the math automatically. He would have been, what, late 20s? Early 30s? Right in the prime of a career that clearly had been going somewhere before it stopped dead. And her mother? Dead. The word was flat, empty of inflection. Car accident. My daughter was in the vehicle, traumatic brain injury, 6 months in and out of hospitals, another year of intensive therapy. She needed someone present, someone who wasn't going to disappear for weeks at a time chasing a career. So you just quit? I made a choice. Daniel's hands never stopped moving, but something in his posture had shifted. Not quite defensive, but braced. Some things matter more than ambition, Ms. Hale. The implicit criticism in his tone made Victoria's spine stiffen. I didn't say there was anything wrong with... You didn't have to. He glanced at her, and for a second that sharp intelligence in his eyes felt like a scalpel cutting through her carefully maintained image. I've met plenty of people like you. Everything's a calculation. Every decision runs through some kind of cost-benefit analysis. You probably can't even imagine walking away from success once you've tasted it. Victoria felt heat rise in her chest despite the cold rain. You don't know anything about me. I know you're standing in a thunderstorm in $1,000 shoes because you can't stand not being in control. His voice was still quiet, but there was an edge to it now. I know you'd rather drown than wait inside where it's safe, because that would mean trusting someone else to handle things. And I know you're so focused on whatever deal you're chasing that you haven't once asked about the safety of your pilots, your passengers, or yourself. Just the timeline. Each observation landed like a physical blow. Victoria wanted to argue, to tear apart his amateur psychology with the verbal precision she'd used to dismantle countless opponents in boardrooms across 3 continents. But the words stuck in her throat, because he wasn't wrong. Not about any of it. My pilots are professionals, she said finally, hating how defensive she sounded. They can take care of themselves. Everyone can take care of themselves until they can't. Daniel pulled a circuit board free, examined it with a critical eye, then set it carefully aside. That's what I learned when my wife died. You can be as strong and independent and successful as you want, but eventually something happens that's bigger than your ability to control it, and then you find out who you really are. And who are you? Victoria asked. Really? He didn't answer for a long time. Just worked in silence, his movements steady and sure despite the conversation. Finally, he reached for something in the depths of the avionics bay, made an adjustment she couldn't see, and pulled his hands back out. I'm a father who knows what matters. He wiped his hands on his coveralls, though it did nothing to clean them. And right now what matters is getting this flight computer reloaded before your deadline. So if you're done psychoanalyzing me, I need to run the initialization sequence. Victoria swallowed whatever response had been forming and just nodded. She watched him work for another 30 minutes, the silence between them heavy with things neither of them wanted to examine. The storm showed no signs of letting up. Lightning split the sky to the north, counting out the distance in seconds of thunder. Her blouse was ruined. Her hair was a disaster. And somewhere in the process of standing in the rain while a man she'd dismissed as a nobody methodically saved her most important deal of the year, Victoria had lost the thread of her own narrative. She was supposed to be the one in control. The one who made things happen through sheer force of will. But watching Daniel work, seeing the quiet competence, the absolute certainty of movement, the way he navigated complex systems like they were extensions of his own body, she realized he had something she'd never developed. He knew how to let go. He'd walked away from what was clearly a significant career, had chosen a screaming baby and hospital rooms and small-town obscurity over whatever trajectory he'd been on. And somehow, despite everything he'd given up, he didn't seem diminished by it. If anything, there was a kind of self-possession in him that Victoria rarely saw in the executives and power players she dealt with every day. They were always reaching, always hungry, always trying to prove something. Daniel Cross had already decided what he was trying to prove, and it had nothing to do with impressing anyone. Try it now, he said, interrupting her thoughts. Victoria blinked. What? The initialization should be complete. Tell your pilots to run through their pre-flight sequence. If everything syncs clean, you're good to go. She pulled out her phone with numb fingers and texted her senior pilot. The response came back almost immediately. Running diagnostics now. They waited. Rain hammered the fuselage. Victoria became aware of how cold she was, how thoroughly soaked, how her teeth wanted to chatter if she'd let them. Daniel stood with his hands in his pockets, apparently unbothered by the weather, watching the aircraft like he could see through the hull to the systems inside. Her phone buzzed. Diagnostics clean, all systems nominal. Whatever he did worked. Victoria read the message twice, then looked up at Daniel. He was already closing the access panel, his movements economical and practiced. That's it? That's it. He secured the last catch and stepped back, surveying his work with professional satisfaction. Clean install, full system sync. You're good for another 1,000 flight hours before your next scheduled maintenance. Victoria stopped, uncertain what she was trying to say. Thank you felt inadequate. How did you do that seemed insulting. Instead, she heard herself ask, what do I owe you? Daniel's expression flickered with something that might have been disappointment. Airport will bill you standard maintenance rates. Talk to the manager inside. That's not what I mean. She took a step closer, tried to catch his eyes in the dim light. Someone with your skills could be working for Boeing, Lockheed, any major aviation company. You could be making... I know what I could be making. His voice was gentle but absolutely final. I also know what it would cost, and I'm not interested in that transaction anymore. But, Ms. Hale, he cut her off, not unkindly. You've got about 5 hours to make your meeting. Weather's clearing from the west. You'll have a smooth flight once you're above the storm layer. Your pilots know what to do from here. He turned and started walking back toward the terminal, his posture already dismissing her, dismissing the conversation, dismissing everything except whatever waited for him inside that sad little building. Victoria stood in the rain, watching him go, feeling like she'd just witnessed something important slip through her fingers without understanding what it was. Wait, she called out. Daniel paused but didn't turn around. Your daughter, Victoria said. Is she okay now? The silence stretched long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. Then his shoulders shifted slightly, and when he spoke, there was something new in his voice. Not quite warmth, but not the careful neutrality either. She's at home doing calculus homework and probably texting her friends about how boring her dad is for making her study on a Friday night. So yeah, she's okay. That's good. Victoria surprised herself with how much she meant it. I'm glad. Daniel nodded once, then continued toward the terminal. This time, she let him go. 90 minutes later, Victoria sat in the Gulfstream's leather seat as they climbed through 30,000 feet, the storm a distant light show beneath them. Her laptop was open, her notes for the Takahashi meeting spread across the table, but her attention kept drifting to the window. Her assistant had sent through the bill from Mercer Regional Airport. Standard maintenance diagnostic fee, parts and labor, all itemized and professional. At the bottom, in the notes section, repairs performed by D-Cross, Senior Maintenance Technician. Senior Maintenance Technician. At a dying airport in rural Kansas. She opened a new browser tab and typed Daniel Cross Aviation Engineer into the search bar, not really expecting to find anything. The first result made her breath catch. It was an article from 8 years ago in Aviation Week and Space Technology. The headline read, Aerospace prodigy Daniel Cross leaves Lockheed Skunk Works, citing family reasons. Victoria clicked through. The article described a rising star in aerospace engineering, someone who'd made significant contributions to next-generation flight control systems before the age of 30. There were quotes from colleagues calling him brilliant, once in a generation, irreplaceable. A small photo showed a younger version of the man she'd met, clean-shaven, wearing a suit, smiling at some industry event with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted his trajectory. The article speculated about what could make someone at that level walk away. Corporate politics, burnout, personal scandal. Nobody had guessed the truth because the truth was too simple, too human. His wife had died, his daughter had needed him, and he'd chosen her over everything else. Victoria closed the laptop and stared out at the darkness beyond the window. Somewhere down there, Daniel Cross was probably checking his daughter's homework, making sure she was ready for bed, doing all the ordinary things that parents did. The same things Victoria's own parents had rarely bothered with, too focused on their own careers to notice their daughter turning herself into a machine designed to win at all costs. She'd never questioned that model before. Success was success. Everything else was just noise, sentiment, weakness. But sitting in a plane that wouldn't be flying if not for a man who'd walked away from everything people like her spent their lives chasing, Victoria found herself wondering, just for a moment, what she'd actually won. Her phone buzzed. Marcus, with an update on the Takahashi meeting logistics. Victoria pushed the thought aside and got back to work. Diamond. The Takahashi deal closed at 2:47 a.m. in a conference room at the Chicago Fairmont. Victoria shook hands with executives whose names she'd memorize later, accepted congratulations from her team, and felt absolutely nothing as $73 million in contracts were digitally signed and sealed. She should have felt triumph. Victory. The rush that came from winning when the stakes were impossibly high. Instead, she kept thinking about grease-stained hands moving through complex wiring with absolute certainty, about a man who'd looked at her $1,000 shoes and seen right through to the emptiness underneath. Hell of a save tonight, boss. Marcus appeared at her elbow with coffee that was somehow both too hot and terrible. When you texted that you were grounded in Kansas, I thought we were dead. We had good luck. Victoria heard herself say it automatically, the polite deflection that successful people used when they didn't want to admit they'd needed help. Still, Marcus grinned, you always find a way. That's why they pay you the big money. Victoria nodded and smiled and said the right things, playing the role she'd perfected over 15 years. But later, alone in her hotel room as dawn started to gray the sky over Lake Michigan, she pulled up that Aviation Week article again. This time, she read past the headline to the substance. The specific systems Daniel had worked on, the patents he'd contributed to, the industry recognition he'd received before disappearing from the public record entirely. And at the very bottom, in a follow-up addendum from 6 months after the original article, a single paragraph. Former Lockheed engineer Daniel Cross has reportedly settled in rural Kansas, where he is raising his daughter following the tragic death of his wife in an automobile accident. Colleagues who spoke on condition of anonymity expressed hope that Cross might eventually return to the industry, but acknowledged that his focus appears to be entirely on his family at present. Entirely on his family. Victoria set the phone down and stared at her reflection in the dark hotel window. Somewhere in Kansas, a 15-year-old girl was probably waking up for school, complaining about homework or weekend plans or whatever ordinary problems teenagers complained about. And her father, a man brilliant enough to have changed aviation history, was probably making her breakfast and reminding her to grab her backpack and doing all the invisible, thankless work that kept a human being growing up safe and loved. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Victoria Hale wondered if she'd been measuring success with the wrong instruments all along. Then her alarm went off, reminding her of a breakfast meeting with the Takahashi executives, and she pushed the thought away. But it didn't disappear. Not entirely. It settled somewhere deep in her chest, a small, uncomfortable weight that felt like the beginning of a question she wasn't ready to ask. Not yet. 3 weeks passed before Victoria thought about Daniel Cross again in any deliberate way. The Takahashi contracts had generated exactly the kind of momentum she'd anticipated. 2 additional partnerships, a profile in Forbes, an invitation to speak at a tech conference in Singapore. Hale Dynamics stock jumped 4 points. Her executive team threw a celebration dinner where everyone got drunk except her, because Victoria never let herself get drunk, never let control slip even for an evening. She should have been satisfied. This was what winning looked like. But late at night, when the meetings ended and the emails slowed and she sat alone in her downtown Chicago penthouse with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city that never quite went dark, she kept seeing rain-slicked tarmac and grease-stained hands moving through complex systems with the kind of certainty she'd spent her whole life trying to cultivate and never quite achieved. It bothered her more than it should have. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon while she was in a budget review meeting with her CFO. Her assistant's face appeared on her laptop screen with an apologetic expression that meant the interruption was unavoidable. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Ms. Hale, but you have an urgent call from Mercer Regional Airport in Kansas. They say it's about your aircraft." Victoria's stomach dropped. "Transfer it." The voice that came through was female, older, with the patient weariness of someone who'd spent too many years dealing with bureaucracy. "Ms. Hale? This is Dorothy Winters, airport manager at Mercer Regional. I'm calling because we've identified a potential safety issue with the maintenance work performed on your Gulfstream 3 weeks ago." The budget spreadsheets on the screen in front of Victoria suddenly seemed very far away. What kind of safety issue? During a routine inspection yesterday, our certified technician discovered that several connections in your avionics bay weren't properly secured according to manufacturer specifications. Now, I want to stress that there's no immediate danger. The aircraft is perfectly flyable, But out of an abundance of caution, we recommend you bring it back for a complete re-inspection and proper certification of all the repair work. Victoria's jaw tightened. The work was done by one of your technicians. Daniel Cross. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Dorothy spoke again, her tone had shifted slightly, become more careful. Mr. Cross is a qualified mechanic, yes, but the technician who performed the inspection is raising questions about whether proper protocol was followed. Given the nature of the repairs and the, let's say, unique circumstances, we think it's best to have everything double-checked by our lead certified technician. Unique circumstances, Victoria repeated flatly. You mean the fact that I had to use your only available mechanic in the middle of a storm because your certified technician was conveniently unavailable? I understand your frustration, Ms. Hale, but how much will this re-inspection cost? Another pause. Given that the original work was performed by our facility, we wouldn't charge for the labor. Just parts if anything needs to be replaced. But we would need the aircraft for approximately 2 days. 2 days. Victoria's calendar was packed solid for the next month. She had a presentation in Dallas on Friday, meetings in Boston the following Tuesday, the Singapore conference in 2 weeks. Grounding her plane for 2 days would throw everything into chaos, force her onto commercial flights, cost her the flexibility that was the entire point of owning a Gulfstream in the first place. I'll have my pilots contact you to schedule it, she said, her voice clipped. But I want a full report on exactly what was found and why your initial inspection didn't catch these issues. Of course, Ms. Hale, we apologize for any inconvenience. Victoria ended the call and stared at her CFO, who'd been politely pretending not to listen. Give me a minute. She walked to the windows overlooking Michigan Avenue, her mind already running through contingencies and backup plans. This was manageable. Annoying, but manageable. She'd dealt with worse disruptions. What bothered her was the implication underneath Dorothy Winters's carefully professional tone. Questions about whether proper protocol was followed. The suggestion that Daniel had cut corners, done sloppy work, left her aircraft in a potentially dangerous condition. That didn't match what she'd seen. The absolute certainty of his movements, the way he'd navigated those systems like he'd designed them himself. Unless she'd been wrong. Unless the late hour and the stress and the storm had made her see competence where there was only confidence, mistake familiarity for expertise. People fooled her all the time. That's why she'd learned to trust numbers and contracts instead of instincts. But this felt different. Victoria pulled out her phone and did something she almost never did. Made a decision based purely on gut feeling instead of data. She dialed the airport directly. Dorothy Winters answered on the third ring, sounding surprised. Ms. Hale, did you have additional questions about, I want to speak with Daniel Cross? Silence. Then, I'm not sure that's necessary. Our certified technician can handle, I didn't ask what was necessary. I asked to speak with Daniel Cross. Victoria's voice had gone cold and flat, the tone that made junior executives check their resumes. Is he available or not? He's, one moment, please. The hold music was something instrumental and forgettable. Victoria counted 47 seconds before the line clicked over. This is Cross. His voice sounded exactly like she remembered. Flat. Midwest vowels, no inflection, the audio equivalent of someone who'd stopped caring about making impressions. It's Victoria Hale. I received a call from your airport manager about issues with the maintenance you performed on my aircraft. She heard what might have been a long exhale. Yeah, I heard. Did you do substandard work on my plane? No. The answer was immediate, unequivocal, completely devoid of defensiveness. Just a statement of fact. Then why is your certified technician claiming the connections weren't properly secured? Because Rick's an idiot who wouldn't know a proper torque specification if it bit him. Daniel's tone hadn't changed, still flat, still neutral, but there was something underneath it now. Frustration, maybe. Or just exhaustion. He thinks because something doesn't match the exact diagram in the maintenance manual, it must be wrong. Doesn't account for the fact that Gulfstream issued 3 different service bulletins modifying the original installation procedure, and the configuration I used is from the most recent one. Victoria felt something loosen in her chest. So the work is safe. The work is perfect. Your plane's safer now than it was when it rolled off the production line, because I also fixed 2 other issues your regular maintenance crew missed. a loose ground wire in the backup electrical system, and a cracked mounting bracket on the environmental control unit, both of which would have caused you problems eventually. Then why is the airport calling me back for reinspection? Daniel was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had gone even more carefully neutral. Because Rick's embarrassed that someone without his fancy certifications did a job he couldn't do, and Dorothy's worried about liability if something goes wrong. Easier to cover their asses by making it look like they're being extra cautious than to admit they don't actually know what they're looking at. That's a serious accusation. That's the truth. But you don't have to believe me. He sounded tired now. Bring your plane back, let them inspect it, waste 2 days and however much it costs to keep your pilot sitting around. They won't find anything wrong because there isn't anything wrong, but at least everyone will feel better about checking the boxes. Victoria stared out at Michigan Avenue, watching tiny people move through their lives 40 stories below. Everything in her training said to trust the institutional process, the certified technician, the official procedures, the paperwork that proved things were done correctly. But Daniel Cross had diagnosed a complex system failure from a description, had fixed it in the middle of a thunderstorm, and had gotten her to the most important meeting of her year without a single problem since. If I don't bring the plane back, she said slowly, and something does go wrong, what happens? Nothing goes wrong. I checked my work 3 times before I closed that access panel. Every connection's torqued to spec. Every software initialization verified. Every backup system tested. I've got the diagnostic logs saved if you want independent verification. Why would you save diagnostic logs for a routine repair? Another pause. Because I knew someone would question it eventually. People like Rick always do. There was something in his voice that made Victoria think this wasn't the first time he'd dealt with certified technicians who couldn't handle being shown up by someone working night maintenance at a nowhere airport. She wondered how many times he'd been right and gotten punished for it anyway. Send me the logs, she said. I'll have my own aviation consultant review them. Fair enough. She heard the faint sound of typing. Sending them now? Anything else? Victoria almost said no, almost ended the call and went back to her budget meeting and let the whole thing drop. But the question that had been sitting in her chest for 3 weeks chose that moment to surface. Why are you still there? What? Kansas, that airport. You're clearly overqualified for night maintenance work. You've got credentials that would get you hired anywhere in the industry, and you're wasting your expertise babysitting crop dusters and dealing with mediocre technicians who resent you. She heard her own voice getting sharper, more aggressive. Why? The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long she thought he'd hung up. Then, I told you why. Your daughter, I remember, but she's 15 now. Teenagers don't need the same kind of constant supervision. You could take a position at a major firm, work reasonable hours, still be present for... You don't know what you're talking about. Daniel's voice had finally changed, gone hard in a way she hadn't heard before. My daughter doesn't need supervision. She needs stability. She needs to know that when she comes home from school, I'm going to be there. Not traveling, not working late, not prioritizing some career over her because that's what ambitious people do. I wasn't suggesting... Yes, you were. You're suggesting exactly what everyone suggests when they find out what I gave up. That somehow there's the middle ground, a way to have it all. If you just optimize your schedule and hire the right help and make smart choices about work-life balance. His words came faster now, pressure building behind them. But that's bullshit, Ms. Hale. You can't optimize your way into being present for someone who's counting on you. You either show up or you don't. And I decided a long time ago which one I was going to do. Victoria felt her face flush. I wasn't trying to tell you how to raise your daughter. Then what were you trying to do? That stopped her. What was she trying to do? Why did it matter to her how Daniel Cross lived his life? I don't know, she admitted finally, but watching someone with your abilities work night maintenance feels like waste. To you, maybe. To my daughter, it's the best decision I ever made. His voice had gentled slightly, but the steel underneath remained. Look, I appreciate that you're defending my work to the airport. That takes guts, but you need to understand something. I'm not interested in getting back on the track I left. I don't want to be recruited. I don't want to be told I'm wasting my potential. I made my choice, and I'm good with it. Even if it means dealing with people like Rick for the rest of your career? Even then, She heard a door close on his end, voices in the background fading. Is there anything else about the actual maintenance work you need to discuss? Victoria recognized a dismissal when she heard one. No, just send those logs. Already did. Check your email. The line went dead. Victoria stood holding her phone, feeling like she'd just lost an argument she hadn't known she was having. Her email chimed. True to his word, Daniel had sent a compressed file containing what looked like several hundred pages of diagnostic data, all meticulously organized and annotated. She forwarded it to her aviation consultant with a note. Need independent verification of this maintenance work. Priority review. Then she went back to her budget meeting and tried to focus on quarterly projections instead of the uncomfortable realization that she'd just been lectured on work-life balance by a man who worked night shifts at a dying airport and somehow seemed more content than anyone in her executive team. The consultant's report came back 2 days later. Victoria read it 3 times, each pass making her jaw tighten a little more. The maintenance work performed on the Gulfstream G650 is not only acceptable, but exceeds industry standards. The technician demonstrated comprehensive knowledge of both manufacturer specifications and subsequent service bulletins. All connections are properly secured using the most current procedures. The additional repairs to the ground wire and environmental control unit were necessary and performed correctly. In my professional opinion, this aircraft is in better condition than it would have been if serviced at a certified Gulfstream facility. I would have no hesitation flying this aircraft or recommending it to clients. At the bottom, a handwritten note. Whoever did this work knows their stuff. If you need contact info for future maintenance, let me know. Victoria drafted an email to Dorothy Winters, then deleted it. Drafted another one, more pointed. Deleted that too. Finally, she just called. Mercer Regional, this is Dorothy. Victoria Hale. I've had the diagnostic logs from Daniel Cross's maintenance work reviewed by an independent aviation consultant. His conclusion is that the work not only meets but exceeds industry standards, and he specifically noted that Mr. Cross identified and corrected 2 additional issues that my regular maintenance crew had missed. A long pause. I see. So unless your certified technician can provide specific evidence of actual safety concerns, not just differences in procedure, I won't be bringing my aircraft back for reinspection. Ms. Hale, I appreciate the independent review, but your internal protocols almost caused me to ground an aircraft that's in perfect working condition based on the wounded ego of someone who couldn't perform the same repair. Victoria's voice could have etched glass. I suggest you focus on making sure your certified technician actually understands the systems he's inspecting before you call clients with safety concerns that don't exist. She hung up before Dorothy could respond, feeling a savage satisfaction that lasted approximately 40 seconds before being replaced by the uncomfortable awareness that she'd just burned considerable energy defending someone who'd made it clear he didn't want or need her defense. Her assistant knocked on the office door frame. Ms. Hale, your 3 o'clock is here. Victoria pulled her focus back to the present. Send them in. The rest of the day passed in the usual rhythm of meetings and decisions and emails that needed responses within the hour. But that evening, sitting in her penthouse with takeout, she was too tired to eat and a glass of wine she didn't really want. Victoria found herself thinking about Daniel Cross again. Not about his skills or his wasted potential or the mystery of why someone that talented had disappeared into rural Kansas. About the way his voice had changed when he'd talked about his daughter needing stability. The certainty underneath the words, the complete absence of regret or second-guessing. She tried to remember the last time she'd been that sure about anything. 2 months later, Victoria's executive assistant booked her onto a regional sales meeting in Wichita, close enough to the Dallas presentation she had scheduled that it made sense to stop on the way back rather than make a separate trip. She approved the schedule without thinking much about it, focused on the Dallas pitch and the 17 other urgent matters competing for her attention. It wasn't until she was reviewing her flight plan the night before departure that she noticed the route her pilots had filed. They were stopping to refuel at Mercer Regional Airport. Victoria stared at the flight plan for a long moment. The logical choice would have been Kansas City or Wichita itself. Larger airports, better facilities, more services. Mercer was out of the way, added 30 minutes to the trip, offered nothing except cheap fuel in a terminal that looked like it was held together with duct tape and optimism. She called her senior pilot. "The Mercer stop," she said without preamble. "Why?" Captain Morris had been flying for her long enough to not sound surprised by the question. Fuel prices, mainly. We also wanted to do a quick systems check after the long flight from Chicago. Mercer's got a mechanic on site who's familiar with our bird. Daniel Cross. That's right. He's the one who fixed us last time. Figured it couldn't hurt to have him give things a once-over while we're refueling anyway. Victoria should have said no. Should have told Morris to reroute to Kansas City, avoid the awkwardness of showing up at an airport where she'd basically accused the manager of incompetence and defended a mechanic who'd made it clear he wanted nothing to do with her. Instead, she heard herself say, "Fine. Make sure we're not there longer than necessary." The flight to Mercer was smooth, uneventful, the kind of perfect conditions that made executive aviation feel like a reasonable luxury instead of an absurd extravagance. They touched down just after 2 in the afternoon, the Kansas landscape stretching flat and brown in all directions under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The terminal looked exactly like Victoria remembered, tired, forgotten, the kind of place that existed mainly in people's rear-view mirrors. But the tarmac was clean, the runway markers fresh. Someone had made an effort, even if the effort couldn't quite overcome decades of deferred maintenance and declining traffic. She stayed in the cabin while Morris went to coordinate the refueling, telling herself she had work to do, emails to answer, a presentation to review. Really, she just didn't want to accidentally run into Daniel and have to explain what she was doing back at his airport after their last conversation. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Victoria's focus on her laptop started to fracture. Through the window, she could see her pilots talking with someone in coveralls, gesturing at the wing. The body language looked casual, professional, nothing urgent. She shouldn't go out there. There was no reason to go out there. Victoria closed her laptop and went out there. The afternoon sun was warm but not oppressive, the air carrying the smell of fuel and cut grass. As she approached the group by the wing, she could hear Morris's voice. "Never seen it diagnosed that fast. You just listened to the engine for 30 seconds and knew exactly what was wrong. Fuel flow sensors got a distinctive sound when it starts to fail. Once you've heard it enough times, you don't forget." Daniel's voice, unchanged. "You've probably got another 100 flight hours before it becomes a real problem, but I'd swap it out at your next scheduled maintenance." "Will do. Appreciate you catching it." Daniel made some non-committal sound, then his gaze shifted and caught on Victoria. For a second, something crossed his face. Surprise, maybe, or annoyance. Then it smoothed back into neutral. "Miss Hale." He nodded once, like they were acquaintances who'd run into each other at a grocery store. "Mr. Cross." She matched his tone. "I didn't realize you were working today." "I work most days." He turned back to Morris. "You're all set. Fuel's topped off, tire pressure's good. I'll send the sensor specs to your maintenance coordinator." Morris glanced between them, clearly picking up on some undercurrent, but smart enough not to comment. "Thanks again. We should be ready to go in about 15 minutes, Ms. Hale." He walked back toward the terminal, leaving Victoria alone with Daniel on the tarmac. The silence stretched uncomfortable and too long. "I got your diagnostic logs reviewed," Victoria said finally, because she couldn't think of anything else to say. "Independent consultant confirmed everything you said. The work was perfect." "I know it was perfect. That's why I did it." Daniel's voice held no satisfaction, no vindication, just fact. "I called Dorothy Winters, told her she was wrong to question it." Now something did shift in his expression. "You didn't need to do that. She called me with safety concerns that didn't exist." "Yes, I did. And now she's pissed at me for making her look bad to a client, which makes my job harder, which is exactly why I told you I don't need defending." He wasn't angry, exactly, just tired. "People like you think you're helping when you swoop in and solve problems, but you don't stick around for the aftermath. I'm the one who has to work with Dorothy and Rick and everyone else who's now convinced I went over their heads." Victoria felt heat rise in her face. "I was trying to make sure credit went where it deserved. I don't need credit. I need to do my job and go home to my daughter without drama." He pulled a rag from his pocket and wiped his hands, a gesture she recognized now as his way of ending conversations. "Your pilots are good to go. Have a safe flight." He turned to leave. "Wait." The word came out sharper than she intended. Daniel paused but didn't turn around. "I'm sorry," Victoria said. The apology felt strange in her mouth, unfamiliar. She apologized so rarely that the mechanics of it felt rusty. You're right. I didn't think about the consequences for you. I saw someone doing excellent work and getting punished for it, and I reacted. Why? He turned now, genuinely curious. Why do you care? That was the question, wasn't it? Why did she care about a mechanic at a nowhere airport, someone she'd met once under stress, and would probably never see again after today? Because watching talented people waste themselves bothers me, she said. It was honest, even if it wasn't the complete truth. Daniel's expression shifted into something that might have been amusement. Still think I'm wasting myself, huh? I think you're capable of more than this. Maybe, but more of what? More money? More prestige? More time away from the people who actually matter? He shook his head. You're measuring success with the wrong ruler, Ms. Hale. Then tell me what the right ruler is. Victoria stepped closer, frustrated now. Because from where I'm standing, you gave up a career that could have changed aviation history to work night maintenance at an airport that probably loses money every year. How is that not waste? Because my daughter gets to grow up with a father who's present. Because I'm home for dinner every night. Because when she has a bad day or needs help with homework or just wants someone to talk to, I'm there. His voice was quiet but absolutely certain. That's not waste, that's the whole point. And what about you? What about what you want? I want her to be okay. Everything else is just noise. Victoria stared at him, searching for cracks in the certainty, some hint of regret or doubt. She found nothing. He meant every word. It should have made her feel better. Instead, it made something in her chest hurt. That must be nice, she heard herself say, being that sure. Daniel's expression softened slightly. You really don't know, do you? Know what? What it feels like to care about something more than you care about winning. He said it gently, without judgment, like he was explaining a simple fact. That's the difference between us, Ms. Hale. I figured out what mattered most and chose it. You're still trying to win at everything, even when there's nothing to win. The words hit like a physical blow. Victoria opened her mouth to argue, to defend herself, to tear apart his amateur psychology the way she'd done in their first conversation. But she couldn't, because he was right. I should go, she managed. My pilots are waiting. Safe flight, Daniel said again. This time, he didn't walk away first, just stood there, watching her with those two sharp eyes that saw things she didn't want examined. Victoria turned and headed back to the Gulf Stream, her stride steady and controlled despite the fact that her hands wanted to shake. She made it up the stairs and into her seat before the first crack appeared in her composure. Morris stuck his head into the cabin. We're ready when you are, Ms. Hale. Go, she said. The engine spooled up. Through the window, she could see Daniel heading back toward the terminal, his coveralls dark against the bright tarmac. He didn't look back. They were airborne 3 minutes later, climbing into perfect blue sky. Victoria opened her laptop, pulled up her presentation notes, tried to focus on quarterly projections and market positioning. Instead, she kept hearing Daniel's voice. You're still trying to win at everything, even when there's nothing to win. She thought about her penthouse in Chicago, bought because it made a statement about success. Her car, chosen for the same reason. The way she worked 16-hour days, not because the work required it, but because stopping felt like surrender. The fact that she couldn't remember the last time she'd had dinner with someone just because she enjoyed their company, not because it served some strategic purpose. Even this flight, this whole trip, she'd approved the Mercer stop without thinking about it. Let her pilots make the decision because it was logical and efficient. She hadn't considered that there might be other reasons to stop somewhere, that maybe efficiency wasn't always the highest virtue. Daniel Cross had walked away from a career that could have made him famous, wealthy, influential. He'd chosen to raise his daughter in a small town, work a job that was beneath his abilities, live a life that probably looked like failure to everyone who'd known him before. And he was content in a way Victoria had never managed to be, despite achieving everything she'd set out to achieve. Her phone buzzed. Marcus, with a question about the Dallas presentation. She answered it automatically, slipping back into the role she'd perfected. Decisive, commanding, always in control. But something had shifted. Some small crack had appeared in the foundation she'd built her life on. And as Kansas disappeared beneath the wing, and the Gulf Stream carved through perfect sky toward her next meeting, her next deal, her next win that would feel hollow even as she celebrated it, Victoria Hale wondered if maybe it was time to stop running long enough to figure out what she was running from. The crack didn't heal. If anything, it widened. Victoria tried to ignore it at first, threw herself into work with even more intensity than usual, as if enough meetings and deals and late nights could patch over the uncomfortable awareness that had taken root in her chest. She closed the Dallas deal, then another one in Boston. Hale Dynamics' quarterly earnings exceeded projections by 18%. The board of directors sent her a crystal trophy that she stuck in a closet because she didn't know where else to put it. None of it felt like it used to. The rush of winning had gone flat, like champagne left open too long. Her executive team started noticing. Marcus asked if she was feeling okay during a strategy session, and Victoria had snapped at him so viciously that he'd actually flinched. She'd apologized later, another unfamiliar gesture, but the damage was done. People were starting to whisper that maybe the pressure was getting to her, that maybe Victoria Hale was finally showing cracks after 15 years of appearing invincible. They weren't wrong. 3 months after the second Mercer stop, Victoria was working late in her office when her phone rang with an unfamiliar Kansas area code. She almost didn't answer, assuming it was some sales call that had gotten past her filters, but something made her pick up. Victoria Hale. Ms. Hale, this is Dorothy Winters from Mercer Regional. The airport manager's voice was tight with stress. I apologize for calling so late, but we have a situation, and I thought you should know immediately. Victoria's stomach dropped. Is it my aircraft? No, nothing like that. It's about Daniel Cross. The world seemed to tilt slightly. What about him? There was an incident earlier tonight. A charter flight came in with engine trouble, serious trouble, smoke in the cockpit. Pilot barely got them on the ground. Daniel was the only mechanic on duty. Dorothy paused, and Victoria could hear her choosing words carefully. He managed to stabilize the situation and prevent what could have been a catastrophic fire. Saved 6 lives, including a family with 2 young children. Relief flooded through Victoria, followed immediately by confusion. That's good. Why are you calling me? Because in the process, he was exposed to some toxic fumes from the burning hydraulic fluid. He collapsed right there on the tarmac. They took him to County Medical about 2 hours ago. Another pause. He listed you as an emergency contact. Victoria's brain stuttered to a halt. He what? I was surprised too, honestly, but when the paramedics asked who to call, he gave them your name and number. Said if something happened, you'd know what to do about his daughter. The phone felt suddenly heavy in Victoria's hand. His daughter, where is she? That's the problem. She's at home alone. Well, she's 15, so not exactly alone, but she doesn't know what happened yet. Daniel was very specific that we shouldn't call her until we'd reached you first. He said you'd understand the situation better than local authorities. I don't understand anything. Victoria was already standing, already reaching for her coat. I barely know the man. Why would he? Ms. Hale, I don't know either, but he was very insistent, even when he could barely breathe. So I'm calling. Dorothy's voice softened slightly. The doctors say he's going to be fine. Respiratory irritation, maybe some chemical burns on his hands, but nothing life-threatening. They're keeping him overnight for observation. Victoria's mind was racing, trying to process information that didn't make sense. Give me the hospital address and his home address. I'm coming out there. That's a 5-hour drive from Chicago. I'll fly. I can be there in 2 hours. Victoria was already texting her pilots, her fingers moving on autopilot while her brain tried to catch up. Don't call his daughter yet. I'll handle it. Are you sure? I can have social services? No. The word came out sharper than intended. No social services. Just give me the addresses and let me handle this. Dorothy rattled off information that Victoria typed into her phone with shaking hands. When the call ended, she stood in her empty office, surrounded by the trappings of success that suddenly felt meaningless, and tried to understand why Daniel Cross had given her name to paramedics. They barely knew each other, had maybe 4 conversations total, none of them particularly friendly. She'd defended his work once, sure, but that hardly qualified her as an emergency contact for someone's child. Unless he'd seen something she hadn't, some connection or responsibility she didn't understand yet. Victoria grabbed her coat and headed for the door, already calling her pilots. The flight to Mercer felt longer than 2 hours. Victoria sat in the cabin, her laptop open but ignored, her mind churning through scenarios and possibilities. What was she supposed to say to a 15-year-old girl whose father was in the hospital? How did you deliver that kind of news to a kid who'd already lost her mother? She realized with uncomfortable clarity that she had no idea how to talk to children, had never particularly wanted to learn. Her life had been carefully constructed to avoid exactly these kinds of messy, emotional complications. And yet, here she was, flying through the night to handle a crisis for a man who'd made it clear he didn't want her involvement in his life. They landed at Mercer just before midnight. The airport was dark except for runway lights and the glow from the terminal windows. Victoria's rental car was waiting. She'd called ahead, pulled strings, made things happen the way she always did when efficiency mattered. The drive to Daniel's address took 15 minutes through quiet streets lined with modest houses and cars that had seen better decades. The neighborhood was working class, tired but maintained, the kind of place where people knew their neighbors and still left porch lights on. Daniel's house was a small ranch-style structure with white siding that needed paint in a yard that someone had tried to keep up but was losing the battle against crabgrass. A light burned in the front window. Victoria sat in the rental car for a long moment, trying to gather courage she didn't know she possessed. Then she got out and knocked. The girl who answered the door was tall for 15, with dark hair pulled into a messy ponytail and her father's sharp gray-blue eyes. She wore sweatpants and an oversized hoodie, held a phone in one hand, and looked annoyed by the interruption. "If you're selling something, we're not—" She stopped, taking in Victoria's expensive coat and the unfamiliar car in the driveway. "Who are you?" "My name is Victoria Hale. I'm a friend of your father's." The girl's expression shifted from annoyed to suspicious. "Dad doesn't have friends who dress like that." "Fair point." Victoria took a breath. "Can I come in? I need to talk to you about something important." "But is this about the church fundraiser? Because he already said no, and I don't—" "It's about your father. He's okay, but there was an incident at the airport tonight, and he asked me to come talk to you." All the color drained from the girl's face. For a second, Victoria saw naked fear flash across those young features before training kicked in, shoulders straightening, jaw setting, walls going up. She'd learned early how to protect herself. "What kind of incident?" "Can I come in first?" The girl stepped back, and Victoria entered a living room that was clean but cluttered in the way homes with actual lives in them always were. Textbooks scattered on the coffee table, a laptop with stickers on it, framed photos on the mantel showing a younger version of the girl with a woman who must have been her mother, laughing, happy, alive in that particular way people in photos taken before tragedy always seem to be. "My name's Emma," the girl said, her voice carefully controlled. "You said my dad's okay. What does that mean?" Victoria sat on the edge of the couch, gestured for Emma to sit too. The girl remained standing, arms crossed, defensive. "There was a charter flight tonight with engine problems. Your father was the mechanic on duty. He prevented what could have been a very serious accident, but in the process, he was exposed to some toxic fumes. The paramedics took him to county medical as a precaution." Emma's face had gone very still. "How bad?" "They say he's going to be fine. Respiratory irritation, some chemical burns on his hands. They're keeping him overnight for observation, but the doctors don't expect any long-term damage." "You talked to the doctors?" "No. The airport manager called me with the information." "Why did she call you?" Emma's eyes narrowed. "I don't know you. Dad's never mentioned anyone named Victoria." Victoria had been asking herself the same question for the past 2 hours. "I honestly don't know, but he gave the paramedics my name as an emergency contact. He specifically asked them to call me before calling you." "That doesn't make any sense." Emma's voice cracked slightly on the last word, the first real break in her composure. "We have neighbors. He has friends at the airport. Why would he give them the name of someone I've never even heard of?" "I think," Victoria said slowly, choosing words carefully, "he wanted to make sure you heard it from someone who understood how important you are to him, someone who wouldn't just deliver information and leave." "You don't know anything about me or how important I am." "You're right. I don't." Victoria met the girl's hostile gaze steadily. "But I know your father walked away from a career that could have made him one of the most respected engineers in aerospace because you needed him. I know he works a job that's beneath his abilities because it keeps him close to home. And I know he listed me as an emergency contact because he thought I was someone who would understand that protecting you was more important than following standard procedures. Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing. You're the CEO, the one from Chicago whose plane he fixed during that storm. So Daniel had mentioned her. Interesting. That's right. He said you were exactly the kind of person he'd left the industry to avoid. Obsessed with winning, didn't understand that some things matter more than success. Emma's voice was flat, quoting words she'd obviously heard verbatim. Why would he trust you with this? The assessment stung even though it was accurate. Maybe because he thought I'd learned something since then. Have you? The question was direct, challenging, nothing childish about it. Emma Cross had grown up fast, had learned to cut through bullshit and get to what mattered. Victoria recognized the survival instinct because she'd developed it herself, albeit for different reasons. I'm learning, Victoria said. Slowly. Your father's been a good teacher, even though I don't think he meant to be. Something shifted in Emma's expression. Not quite trust, but maybe the willingness to consider trusting. I want to see him. I'll take you to the hospital right now. You don't have to do that. I can call someone. Emma, Victoria kept her voice gentle. Your father asked me to handle this. Let me handle it. The girl stared at her for another few seconds, then nodded once. I need to grab my phone charger. While Emma disappeared down a hallway, Victoria looked around the living room more carefully. Everything in it spoke of careful choices made on a limited budget. Furniture that was functional rather than stylish, decorations that were meaningful rather than expensive. But there was warmth here, a sense of a place that was actually lived in and loved, that wasn't just a showpiece designed to impress visitors. Nothing like Victoria's pristine penthouse that always looked like a photo shoot, even though no one but her ever saw it. Emma reappeared with a backpack and a jacket. Okay, let's go. The drive to County Medical was silent except for the GPS directions. Victoria kept stealing glances at the girl beside her, trying to reconcile this self-possessed teenager with the image of the injured child Daniel had described. Emma stared out the window, her jaw tight, hands clenched in her lap. He's going to be okay, Victoria said finally. The doctors were very clear about that. People say that a lot. Sometimes they're lying. I'm not lying. You don't know that for sure. You said you talked to the airport manager, not the doctors. You're just repeating what someone else told you. Emma's voice was sharp with the kind of logic that came from having bad things happen and learning not to trust reassurances. And even if they think he's okay now, complications happen. Infections, allergic reactions. People die in hospitals all the time. Victoria's chest tightened. Did your mother die in a hospital? No, she died in the ambulance before they could even get her there. Emma's voice had gone flat, reciting facts without emotion. They worked on her for 23 minutes before they called it. I was in the other ambulance with a fractured skull and a brain bleed, so I didn't find out until I woke up 3 days later. I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry. Doesn't change anything. The girl's hands clenched tighter. After she died, everyone kept telling me things would be okay, that I'd heal, that life would get better, that we'd find a new normal. And they were right, I guess, but it took a lot longer than they made it sound, and it hurt worse than they admitted. Victoria didn't know what to say to that. There was no platitude that wouldn't sound hollow, no reassurance that this girl hadn't already heard and dismissed, so she just drove, letting the silence stretch. He gave up everything for me. Emma's voice was quieter now. I know that. Everyone thinks I don't understand, that I'm just a kid who takes it for granted, but I know. He was brilliant, famous. He had this whole amazing career, and he walked away from it because I needed him. That was his choice. Yeah, and I'm the reason he had to make it. There was pain underneath the words, old guilt that had been festering for years. Sometimes I think about what his life would be like if my mom had been driving alone that day. If I hadn't been in the car, he'd probably be at Lockheed or NASA or somewhere actually using his brain instead of fixing crop dusters in Kansas. Victoria pulled into the hospital parking lot and killed the engine before turning to face Emma fully. Can I tell you something your father said to me? The girl shrugged, not meeting her eyes. He said the greatest success isn't power or prestige. It's building a life that truly matters. Victoria paused, making sure Emma was listening. He didn't say that like someone who settled for less. He said it like someone who'd figured out what most people spend their whole lives missing. You're not the reason he gave up his career, Emma. You're the reason he finally understood what success actually meant. Emma's throat worked. That's easy for you to say. You don't have to watch him waste himself at that terrible airport. I used to think he was wasting himself too, but I was wrong. Victoria surprised herself with how much she meant it. Your father is the most content person I've ever met, and that's not despite his choices. It's because of them. Content isn't the same as happy. No, it's better. Happy is temporary. Content is knowing you made the right choice even when it's hard. They sat in the parking lot in silence for another moment. Then Emma grabbed her backpack and opened the door. Come on, I need to see him. County Medical was small, probably struggling financially, but clean and staffed by people who looked tired but competent. The night nurse at the desk directed them to the second floor after checking their IDs and making Emma sign in as immediate family. He's in room 212, awake but groggy. The doctor said he can go home tomorrow morning if his oxygen levels stay stable. The nurse looked at Victoria. Are you family too? Emergency contact, Victoria said, which wasn't quite an answer. They found room 212 at the end of a quiet hallway. Through the small window in the door, Victoria could see Daniel propped up in bed, an oxygen cannula in his nose, bandages on both hands. He looked pale and exhausted, but his eyes were open, staring at the ceiling with the kind of resigned patience of someone who'd spent too much time in hospitals. Emma pushed through the door without knocking. Dad? Daniel's head turned, and his whole face changed, relief and love and worry all flashing across his features in quick succession. Hey, you okay? I'm fine. You're the one in the hospital bed. Emma's voice cracked as she crossed to his side. What were you thinking? Dorothy said there was smoke everywhere, that you could barely breathe, and you just stayed there fixing the engine. Had to get those people out safely. Daniel's voice was rough, like he'd been breathing sandpaper. Charter was carrying a family, 2 little kids. I don't care. Emma's composure finally shattered, tears spilling down her face. You could have died. You could have left me just like Mom did. And for what? To save some strangers? No, you don't get to do that. You don't get to tell me how precious life is and how important it is to be there for people and then throw yourself into danger like your life doesn't matter. She was crying hard now, all the fear and stress of the past hours pouring out. You're all I have. You can't leave me. Daniel managed to lift one bandaged hand to her face, wiping at tears with his thumb. I'm not leaving you. I'm right here. I'm okay. This time, what about next time? There's not going to be a next time. You can't promise that. No, Daniel admitted. I can't, but I can promise I'm not going anywhere by choice. You're stuck with me, kiddo. Emma pressed her face against his shoulder, crying in a way that suggested she hadn't let herself cry in a long time. Daniel held her as best he could with bandaged hands, murmuring quiet reassurances that Victoria couldn't quite hear from her position by the door. She should leave. This was a private moment, a father comforting his daughter, nothing to do with her. But her feet wouldn't move. She stood there watching them, something painful and unfamiliar twisting in her chest. This was what mattered. This connection, this love, this absolute certainty that another human being's well-being was more important than anything else. Daniel had tried to explain it to her with words, but watching it, seeing the way Emma clung to him, the way he held her despite obvious pain, the way they fit together like 2 pieces of the same whole, drove it home in a way words never could. Victoria had spent 15 years building an empire. She had wealth, power, respect, influence. She could make things happen with a phone call, could move markets with a decision. And she had nothing remotely close to what Daniel Cross had with his daughter in this shabby hospital room. Ms. Hale. Daniel's rough voice pulled her from her thoughts. Thank you for bringing her. Victoria stepped into the room properly. Of course. Though I'm still not sure why you listed me as an emergency contact. Because you were the only person I could think of who'd understand the math. He shifted slightly, wincing. If something happened to me, Emma would be put in the system. Foster care, probably, since I don't have family nearby. I needed someone who'd have the resources and the stubbornness to fight that. Someone who wouldn't just accept the standard procedures. You barely know me. I know enough. I knew you'd move heaven and earth to close that deal in Chicago. Figured you'd apply the same intensity to protecting a kid if I asked you to. His eyes met hers, direct and challenging. Was I wrong? Victoria thought about it, really thought about it. If something had happened to Daniel tonight, if he died on that tarmac, would she have fought for Emma? Taken on the bureaucracy, used her resources, done whatever it took to keep this girl out of the system? No, she said finally. You weren't wrong. Daniel nodded, satisfied. Good. Then I didn't misjudge you. Emma had pulled back, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. You shouldn't have to plan for that stuff, Dad. You should just not almost die. Noted. I'll add it to my to-do list. This isn't funny. I know, sweetheart. I'm sorry. He looked at Victoria again. How bad is the damage at the airport? Dorothy must be freaking out about liability. I haven't talked to Dorothy. I came straight here from Chicago. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or confusion. You flew out here as the middle of the night because I listed you as an emergency contact? You saved 6 lives tonight and ended up in the hospital. What else was I supposed to do? I don't know. Not drop everything and fly to Kansas? Daniel studied her with those 2 sharp eyes. That's not very CEO-like behavior. Maybe I'm trying to be less CEO-like. The words came out before Victoria could stop them, more honest than she'd intended. The room went quiet. Emma looked between them, clearly trying to figure out what was happening. Daniel just watched Victoria with an expression she couldn't quite read. The charter you saved, Victoria said, needing to fill the silence. The family. Do you know who they were? Just people. Does it matter? It might matter to them that you nearly killed yourself to save them. I didn't nearly kill myself. I just breathed some bad air. Daniel's tone was dismissive. The engine was still hot but manageable. I knew what I was doing. You collapsed on the tarmac. After everyone was safe. Priorities. He shifted again, clearly uncomfortable. Look, I appreciate you coming out here and taking care of Em, but you don't need to stick around. She can call a neighbor to drive us home tomorrow. I'm staying. Victoria said it with the same finality she used in boardrooms. You're in no condition to argue, and your daughter shouldn't be dealing with this alone. I'm not alone. I have Dad. Emma's voice was defensive, protective. I know, but he's injured and on pain medication, which means someone needs to drive you both home tomorrow. Make sure he follows doctor's orders and handle whatever logistics need handling. Victoria pulled out her phone. I'll get a hotel room nearby. What time does the doctor do rounds? Daniel opened his mouth to protest, then seemed to realize it was pointless. Around 8. But seriously, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I'm choosing to. Victoria met his gaze steadily. You trusted me with your daughter. Let me see it through. He studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes. Okay. Thank you. The words were simple, but they carried weight. An acknowledgement that maybe they'd moved past whatever adversarial thing had existed between them before. Emma's phone buzzed. She checked it, then looked at her father. My calculus study group is freaking out because I'm not answering. Can I tell them what happened? Keep it vague. Just say I'm fine and you'll explain tomorrow. While Emma stepped into the hallway to text, Victoria moved closer to the bed. How bad is the pain? Manageable. Daniel's voice had the careful neutrality of someone lying through his teeth. That's not what I asked. My hands feel like I stuck them in a deep fryer. My lungs are trying to turn inside out every time I breathe, and the room won't stop tilting sideways. But I've had worse. When? The 6 months after Emma's accident. Compared to watching my daughter learn to walk again after brain surgery, this is nothing. He said it matter-of-factly, no self-pity, just statement of fact. Pain's relative, Ms. Hale. You can call me Victoria. I think we're past formalities at this point. Something that might have been a smile tugged at his mouth. Okay, Victoria. He tested the name like he was trying it out. You really didn't have to fly out here. I know. So why did you? Victoria thought about how to answer that. The truth was complicated, involved questions about purpose and meaning that she was only beginning to understand herself. Because when someone trusts you with the most important thing in their life, you show up. Daniel's expression softened. That's the first thing you've said that sounds like you actually get it. Get what? Why I'm here instead of Lockheed. Why I work nights at a dying airport. Why I walked away from everything people like you spend their lives chasing. He paused, his rough voice even rougher with emotion. It's not about sacrifice or settling for less. It's about figuring out what actually matters and having the guts to choose it. I'm starting to understand that. Are you? Or are you just saying what you think I want to hear? The challenge in his voice made Victoria bristle automatically. Then she stopped, examined the defensive response, recognized it for what it was: habit, armor, the instinct to protect herself from uncomfortable truths. I don't know, she admitted. A few months ago, I would have said you were wasting yourself, that choosing personal happiness over professional achievement was weakness. But watching you tonight, seeing Emma being trusted with this, she gestured vaguely at the hospital room, unable to articulate what she meant. I don't have what you have, and I'm starting to realize that might be a problem. Daniel studied her for a long moment. What do you have? A company worth $400 million, properties in 3 cities, a reputation for being the most ruthless negotiator in the Midwest. The words sounded hollow even as she said them. A closet full of trophies I don't remember earning. Sounds lonely. It is. The admission surprised her. She'd never said it out loud before, barely acknowledged it to herself. I've spent 15 years building exactly the life I thought I wanted, and somewhere along the way I forgot to include anyone else in it. It's not too late to change that. Isn't it? I'm 42 years old. I've alienated everyone who might have been close to me. I don't know how to be the kind of person who has what you have with Emma. You flew to Kansas in the middle of the night for a kid you'd never met because her father asked you to. That's a start. But Daniel's eyes were gentle now, understanding in a way that made Victoria's throat tight. You're not as disconnected as you think you are. You're just out of practice. Emma came back into the room, still clutching her phone. Study group wants to know if they should send food. I told them we're fine, but Maya's mom is apparently already making a casserole. Tell Maya's mom thank you, but we're covered, Daniel said. Are we covered? Emma looked at Victoria. Are you actually staying, or is this one of those things where adults say they'll do something and then disappear? The question was direct, testing, layered with old hurt. Victoria recognized the defense mechanism. Emma had been let down before, probably multiple times, and she'd learned not to trust promises from people who showed up during crises and vanished when things got hard. I'm staying, Victoria said. Hotel tonight, then I'll drive you both home tomorrow and make sure your dad follows doctor's orders. And then? I don't know. But I'm not disappearing. She met Emma's skeptical gaze. Your father trusted me with you. I take that seriously. Emma studied her for another few seconds, then nodded slowly. Okay. But if you're staying, you should know Dad's terrible at following doctor's orders. You'll have to threaten him. I'm very good at threatening people. Good. Emma's mouth quirked in something that wasn't quite a smile. He responds to direct confrontation better than reasoning. I'm right here, Daniel protested. We know, Emma and Victoria said simultaneously, then looked at each other in surprise. For the first time since Victoria had knocked on that door, something almost like warmth passed between her and Daniel's daughter. Not quite trust, but maybe the beginning of it. A nurse came in to check Daniel's vitals and gently suggested that visiting hours were technically over. Emma kissed her father's forehead and made him promise to text if he needed anything. Victoria hung back, uncertain of her role in this family dynamic. I'll take care of her, she said quietly to Daniel as Emma gathered her things. I know you will. He caught her wrist with bandaged fingers. Thank you for all of it. Victoria nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and followed Emma out into the fluorescent hallway. They found a hotel 6 blocks from the hospital, nothing fancy, just a clean chain place with a night clerk who barely looked up from his phone. Victoria booked 2 rooms and handed Emma a key card. You need anything before tomorrow? She asked. Just sleep. Emma hesitated, then added, Thanks for coming, and for not treating me like a kid who can't handle things. You clearly can handle things. Yeah, well, I've had practice. The girl's voice was tired, all the emotional energy of the night catching up with her. See you in the morning, 8 a.m. We'll get breakfast before heading to the hospital. Emma disappeared into her room, leaving Victoria alone in a generic hotel corridor that could have been anywhere in America. She stood there for a moment, trying to process the past 6 hours, then gave up and went to her own room. Inside, she kicked off her shoes and sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing her coat. Her phone had 17 unread messages. Marcus with updates, her assistant with tomorrow's schedule, board members congratulating her on the latest quarterly numbers. None of it seemed to matter. Victoria thought about Daniel lying in that hospital bed, bandaged and exhausted, holding his crying daughter with the kind of fierce love that didn't need words. She thought about Emma's hard-won self-possession, the armor of a girl who'd learned too young that the world could take away everything you loved. She thought about the way they fit together, broken pieces that had somehow made themselves into something whole. And she thought about her own empty penthouse, her strategic friendships, her carefully curated life that looked perfect from the outside and felt hollow from within. For the first time in 15 years, Victoria Hale admitted to herself that she had no idea what she was doing. The realization should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt almost like relief. Victoria woke at 6 the next morning, not from an alarm but from the unfamiliar silence. No traffic noise filtering up from Michigan Avenue. No ambient hum of a city that never fully slept. Just quiet broken occasionally by a truck on the highway and birdsong that seemed aggressively cheerful for the situation. She lay in the generic hotel bed staring at the popcorn ceiling, trying to remember the last time she'd canceled a day of meetings to take care of someone else. The answer was never. She'd never done that, had barely taken sick days for herself, let alone rearranged her schedule for another person's crisis. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Board meeting moved to tomorrow per your request. Everything okay? She typed back, fine. Family emergency. Then stared at the words, wondering when Daniel and Emma had become family in her head. At 7:30, she knocked on Emma's door. The girl answered already dressed, looking tired but composed. Her hair pulled back in the same messy ponytail from last night. You're actually here, Emma said, something like surprise in her voice. I said I would be. Yeah, but people say a lot of things. Emma grabbed her backpack. There's a diner 2 blocks from the hospital. Dad likes their pancakes. The diner was exactly what Victoria expected. Vinyl booths, laminated menus, coffee that could strip paint. Emma ordered without looking at the menu, comfortable in a way that suggested she'd been here before. Victoria got coffee and tried not to wince at the taste. So what's your deal with my dad? Emma asked once the waitress had left. Victoria nearly choked on her coffee. What? He never talks about people from his old life, never mentions colleagues or former bosses or anyone from before Kansas. But he's mentioned you 3 times in the past few months. Emma's gaze was direct, assessing. Once after you called about that inspection thing, once after you stopped at the airport in September, and once last week when he was explaining why he listed you as emergency contact. So what's your deal? I don't have a deal with your father. We barely know each other. That's not what I asked. Victoria set down her coffee cup, recognizing when she was being outmaneuvered. This kid was sharp, had learned to read people the same way Victoria had, probably for similar reasons. Survival. Your father fixed my plane during a storm, Victoria said carefully. He did extraordinary work under difficult circumstances. That impressed me. Lots of people must impress you. You don't fly to Kansas in the middle of the night for all of them. No, I don't. So why him? Victoria thought about how to answer that honestly. Because he sees things clearly. He made a choice that most people would consider crazy, walking away from success to raise you, and he doesn't regret it. That's rare. In my world, everyone's always chasing more. More money, more power, more recognition. Your father figured out what mattered and stopped chasing. And you want to figure that out too. It wasn't a question. Emma said it like a fact she'd already confirmed, and Victoria realized she'd been read as easily as she'd read 1,000 executives across boardroom tables. Maybe, Victoria admitted. I'm starting to think I've been measuring things wrong. Emma nodded slowly, processing. He talks about you differently than other people from before, like you're still figuring things out instead of already having all the answers. I definitely don't have all the answers. Good. People who think they do are usually wrong about everything. The waitress brought pancakes that Emma attacked with focused efficiency. My mom thought she had everything figured out. Perfect plan for her life, perfect timeline, perfect career trajectory. Then she died in a car accident at 34, and none of it mattered. The bluntness of it hit Victoria like cold water. I'm sorry. Don't be. I'm just saying, Dad's the only person I know who actually gets that you can't control everything, so you might as well focus on what you can control, like being there for people. Emma paused mid-bite. You showed up last night. That's more than a lot of people do. Victoria felt something warm and uncomfortable settle in her chest. Your father trusted me. I couldn't just ignore that. Yeah, but you could have sent someone else, hired a service, made it someone else's problem. Emma's eyes were too knowing for 15. You didn't, though. You came yourself. Of course I did. See, you say of course like it's obvious, but it's not. Most successful people I've met, and I've met a few through Dad's old colleagues who visit sometimes, they don't do things themselves if they can delegate. You're different. Victoria didn't know what to say to that, so she just drank her terrible coffee and watched Emma demolish pancakes with the single-minded focus of a teenager who'd been too stressed to eat properly the night before. They arrived at the hospital at 8:15. Daniel was awake, sitting up in bed arguing with a doctor who looked thoroughly unimpressed by his protests. Perfectly capable of managing my own recovery. I don't need home health visits. Mr. Cross, you have chemical burns on both hands and respiratory damage from toxic fume exposure. Someone needs to monitor your oxygen levels and change your bandages for at least 3 days. The doctor, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, spotted Emma and Victoria. Maybe your family can talk sense into you. Dad, just let them send the nurse, Emma said, crossing to the bed. Don't be stupid about this. I'm not being stupid. I'm being practical. Home health costs money, which you have insurance to cover, the doctor said firmly. Insurance that has a deductible I've already hit this year because someone, he glanced at Emma, needed an MRI in March when she started getting headaches. Those headaches were nothing, and you're changing the subject. Emma's voice had gone sharp with worry disguised as irritation. You need help. Accept the help. Victoria stepped forward before she could think better of it. I'll handle it. 3 pairs of eyes turned to her. I'll stay for the next 3 days, Victoria continued, her brain catching up with her mouth. I can monitor oxygen levels, change bandages, make sure he follows doctor's orders. I'm perfectly capable of learning whatever needs to be learned. The doctor looked skeptical. Do you have any medical training? No, but I have a graduate degree in business and 15 years of experience learning complex systems under pressure. I think I can handle basic wound care. This isn't a business negotiation, Ms. Hale. Victoria Hale. And you're right. It's not a negotiation. I'm telling you I'll be staying with Mr. Cross for the next 72 hours to ensure proper recovery. If there are specific instructions or procedures I need to learn, I'll learn them. If you need to verify my competence, I'm happy to demonstrate whatever you require. The doctor blinked, clearly unused to being steamrolled before 9 a.m. That's highly irregular. Is it against hospital policy? Well, no, but then we're settled. Victoria pulled out her phone. Give me your email, and I'll provide contact information where you can reach me at any time if concerns arise. Daniel was staring at her like she'd grown a second head. Victoria, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. We've established that. I'm choosing to. She met his gaze steadily. You listed me as your emergency contact. That means something. Let me finish what I started. You have a company to run, meetings, responsibilities, which I can handle remotely for 3 days. Marcus has been agitating for more autonomy anyway. This is a good test. Victoria turned back to the doctor, who was still looking bewildered. What do I need to know? The next 20 minutes were a crash course in wound care, oxygen monitoring, and warning signs that would require immediate medical attention. Victoria took notes on her phone with the same focused intensity she brought to board presentations, asking clarifying questions until the doctor seemed satisfied that she actually understood the protocols. All right, the doctor said finally, but I'm scheduling a follow-up visit for tomorrow afternoon to check his progress. And if anything changes, any difficulty breathing, signs of infection, increased pain, you call immediately. Understood. The doctor left, shaking her head and muttering something about stubborn patients attracting stubborn caretakers. Emma was grinning. That was amazing. She didn't stand a chance. I negotiate with corporate executives for a living. Doctors are easy. Victoria glanced at Daniel, who was still staring at her with an unreadable expression. What? You just volunteered to be my nurse for 3 days. Yes. You don't even like me. That's not true. I find you frustrating, which is different. Victoria sat in the chair beside his bed. And regardless of how I feel about you personally, you trusted me with your daughter. That creates an obligation. To Emma, maybe. Not to me. They're the same obligation. Taking care of you is taking care of her. Victoria surprised herself with how much she meant it. Besides, someone needs to make sure you actually rest instead of trying to go back to work tomorrow with bandaged hands and damaged lungs. Daniel's mouth quirked. You think you can stop me? I know I can. I'm significantly more stubborn than you are, and I don't have respiratory damage limiting my ability to argue. Emma laughed outright at that. I like her, Dad. She's mean. I'm not mean. I'm direct. Same thing. Emma checked her phone. I need to get to school. You two gonna be okay? We'll be fine, Victoria said. I'll text you updates throughout the day. Emma hesitated, looking between them. You're sure about this? Because if this is some kind of corporate charity thing where you're going to bail after a day, it's not charity and I'm not bailing. Victoria kept her voice gentle. I promise. The girl studied her for another moment, then nodded. Okay, but he's a terrible patient, gets cranky when he's in pain and pretends he's fine when he's not. I'm sitting right here, Daniel protested weakly. We know. Emma kissed his forehead carefully, avoiding the oxygen cannula. Behave. Listen to Victoria. I'll check in after school. She left with a wave, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders, looking more like a normal teenager than she had since Victoria had knocked on her door last night. The room felt suddenly quiet in her absence. You really don't have to do this, Daniel said after a moment. Stop saying that. I've made my decision. Why? Victoria thought about how to answer. The truth was complicated, involved realizations she was still processing about purpose and meaning and what actually mattered. Because 3 months ago, I would have sent Marcus or hired a service or found some efficient solution that didn't require my personal involvement, and I'm trying to be less like that person. You don't need to use me as some kind of redemption project. I'm not. She stopped, frustrated. I'm trying to show up, for once, to do something that isn't calculated or strategic or designed to benefit me in some way. Can you just let me do that without analyzing my motives? Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Okay, but fair warning, I'm a miserable patient. Em wasn't exaggerating. I've handled hostile takeovers and contentious board meetings. I think I can manage one stubborn mechanic. Former aerospace engineer, he corrected automatically, then smiled slightly. If we're doing this, you should get the title right. Something eased in Victoria's chest. Former aerospace engineer, she amended, who is currently my responsibility for the next 3 days, whether he likes it or not. The hospital discharged him at noon with a pharmacy bag full of medications, detailed instructions, and stern warnings about overdoing it. Victoria took notes on everything, organized the prescriptions by time and dosage, and commandeered a wheelchair despite Daniel's protests that he could walk perfectly fine. Hospital policy, she said firmly, and you're conserving energy whether you like it or not. The drive to Daniel's house felt different in daylight. Victoria could see the neighborhood properly now, modest but maintained, the kind of place where people still sat on their porches and kids played in unfenced yards. Nothing like the sterile luxury of her Chicago building with its doormen and security systems. Daniel's house looked smaller in daylight, the peeling paint more obvious, the sagging gutter over the garage more pronounced. But the lawn had been mowed recently, and someone had planted flowers in the bed by the front door, cheerful yellow things that were probably Emma's doing. Victoria helped Daniel inside, noting the careful way he moved, the stiffness in his shoulders that suggested more pain than he was admitting. The interior was exactly as she remembered, cluttered but clean, lived in, full of the small details that made a house a home. Couch or bed? She asked. Couch. If I go to bed now, I won't sleep tonight. She settled him on the couch with pillows, a blanket, and the remote control. Then she found the kitchen and started familiarizing herself with the layout. The refrigerator held basics: milk, eggs, some leftovers in Tupperware, an alarming amount of energy drinks that probably belonged to Emma. The pantry was similarly practical. Nothing fancy, everything functional. Victoria made tea because it seemed like something a caretaker should do, then brought it to Daniel along with his first round of medications. "You don't have to hover," he said, accepting the tea. "I'm not hovering, I'm monitoring." "That's the same thing." "No, hovering is anxious. Monitoring is professional." She sat in the armchair across from him, pulled out her laptop. "I have work to do anyway. You just rest." For a while they existed in comfortable silence. Victoria answered emails, reviewed contracts, participated in a conference call with her leadership team. Daniel dozed intermittently, woke up looking disoriented, took his medications without complaint when she reminded him. Around 3, he woke more fully and found her still working on her laptop. "Don't you ever stop?" he asked. "Stop what?" "Working. Being productive. Optimizing every minute." Victoria closed her laptop. "I'm trying to. It's harder than it looks." "What would you be doing right now if you weren't here?" "Probably in my office, another meeting, maybe reviewing acquisition targets." She paused. Nothing that couldn't wait. Everything can wait. That's what most people never figure out. Daniel shifted, winced, adjusted the oxygen cannula that was clearly irritating him. "When Emma was in the hospital after the accident, I tried to keep working at first. Thought I could split my time, be there for her, and maintain my career. Lasted about 2 weeks before I realized I was doing both things badly." "What changed?" "She had a seizure. Middle of the night, completely unexpected. I wasn't there. I was at a conference in Seattle, presenting some paper on flight control systems. By the time I got back, they'd stabilized her, but she'd been terrified. Kept asking the nurses why her daddy wasn't there." His voice had gone quiet. "That's when I understood. There is no splitting time. You're either present or you're not." Victoria felt something twist in her chest. "So you quit, gave 2 weeks' notice, sold the house in California, moved to Emma's grandparents' place in Kansas until I could figure out what came next." He looked around the small living room. "This came next. Small town, steady job, schedule that let me be home when she needed me. Not glamorous, but it worked." "Do you ever miss it? The engineering, the big projects?" "Sometimes. Usually around 3 a.m. when I can't sleep and I'm thinking about some problem I'll never get to solve." Daniel's expression was thoughtful, not sad. "But then Emma comes home from school and tells me about her day. Or we watch some terrible movie she picked, or she needs help with calculus, and I remember why I made the choice. The engineering will still be there. She won't." "She's 15. You've got years." "No, I've got right now. Years are a myth. You only ever have right now, and you either use it for what matters, or you waste it chasing things that won't matter in the end." He met her gaze. "That's what you haven't figured out yet. You keep thinking there'll be time later to live the life you actually want. But there's no later. There's just a series of right nows, and eventually you run out." Victoria wanted to argue, to point out that strategic planning and long-term thinking were valuable, that you couldn't just live moment to moment without building towards something. But the words felt hollow before she even spoke them. "I'm 42 years old," she said instead. "I've spent half my life building a company. I can't just walk away from that." "I'm not suggesting you walk away. I'm suggesting you figure out what you're building it for." Daniel closed his eyes, clearly exhausted. "What's the end game, Victoria? You make Hale Dynamics worth $1 billion, then what? 2 billion? 10? Where does it stop?" "When I've proven—" She stopped. "Proven what?" "That I'm worth something, that I matter, that I'm more than just—" The words stuck in her throat, surprising her with their honesty. "My parents didn't have time for me. They were both surgeons, obsessed with their careers, their reputations. I was an afterthought, something to be managed by nannies and boarding schools. So I decided I'd be so successful they'd have to notice. I'd build something so impressive they couldn't ignore it. Did it work? My mother died 6 years ago, never once told me she was proud. My father remarried and moved to Arizona. We talk maybe twice a year." Victoria heard her voice crack and hated it. "So no, it didn't work." Daniel opened his eyes. "Then why are you still trying?" The question hung in the air between them, unanswerable and devastating. Victoria stared at her laptop, at the emails and spreadsheets and all the urgent matters that had felt so important an hour ago and now seemed meaningless. "I don't know how to do anything else," she admitted finally. "Sure you do. You're doing it right now. Sitting in your living room is not a life strategy. No, but showing up for someone who needs you is. That's a start." Daniel's voice was gentle. "You flew to Kansas in the middle of the night, took care of my daughter, bullied a doctor into letting you be my nurse, and canceled 3 days of meetings to make sure I recovered properly. That's not the behavior of someone who only knows how to optimize quarterly earnings. I don't know what it is then. It's being human. Messy, inefficient, completely unstrategic human." He smiled slightly. "Welcome to the club. We don't have impressive titles or quarterly projections, but the company's better." Victoria felt something loosen in her chest, some knot she'd been carrying for so long she'd forgotten it was there. "I'm terrible at this." "At what?" "Caring about people, being present, all of it. I don't have practice." "Then practice now. Stay for 3 days. Help me recover. Talk to Emma when she gets home. Figure out what it feels like to prioritize people over productivity." Daniel's eyes were kind. "Worst case scenario, you waste 72 hours. Best case, you learn something." "And if I can't? If I'm too broken to figure this out?" "You're not broken. You're just out of balance." He shifted slightly, adjusting the blanket. "Everyone's out of balance in some way. The trick is figuring out what tips the scales back toward something real." Before Victoria could respond, her phone buzzed. Marcus, with an urgent question about a contract negotiation. She looked at the message, then at Daniel, dozing on the couch, then back at her phone. For the first time in 15 years, she ignored the message. The next 2 days fell into a rhythm Victoria had never experienced before. She woke early, made a breakfast for Daniel and Emma, monitored medications and wound care with the obsessive attention to detail she usually reserved for contract terms. Emma left for school each morning with a wave and came home in the afternoon full of teenage drama that Victoria learned to navigate with increasing competence. Daniel proved to be exactly as difficult a patient as warned. He tried to work on his laptop one-handed until Victoria confiscated it. He attempted to fix a leaking faucet in the kitchen until she physically blocked him from the sink. He argued about every medication, every rest period, every restriction. "You're enjoying this," he accused on the second afternoon. "Enjoying what?" "Being in charge, telling me what to do." Victoria considered that. "Maybe a little. You're not used to someone else making decisions for you." "Neither are you. How are you handling it?" "What do you mean?" "Marcus has called you 6 times today. Your board sent an urgent email about the Singapore presentation. You've got a company to run, and you're here making me soup." Daniel was watching her with those sharp eyes. "That must be killing you." "It's not killing me, it's just different." "Different good or different bad?" Victoria thought about how to answer honestly. "I keep waiting to feel anxious, like I'm missing something crucial. But I don't. Marcus is handling things fine. The board can wait. And making you soup is—" She stopped, surprised by what she was about to say. "Is what?" "Nice. It's nice to do something that has immediate, visible impact. You eat the soup, you feel better, problem solved. No complex negotiations or delayed results." Daniel smiled. "Welcome to normal life, where most things are that simple if you let them be." Emma came home then, dropping her backpack with a thud. "How's the patient?" "Insufferable," Victoria said. "Recovering nicely despite my tyrannical nurse," Daniel countered. Emma grinned. "Good. You're both annoying, which means everything's normal." She grabbed an apple from the kitchen. "I've got calc homework. Victoria, can you help? Dad's terrible at math." "I'm an aerospace engineer. I'm excellent at math." "You're excellent at engineering math. Calculus homework is different." Emma was already heading to the dining table. "Victoria looks like she was good at school." "I was valedictorian," Victoria admitted, following her. "See? Engineer math versus school math. Totally different." Victoria spent the next hour helping Emma work through derivatives and integration problems, surprised by how much she remembered and how much she enjoyed the focused problem solving. Daniel dozed on the couch, the oxygen cannula finally removed that morning, his breathing easier. "You're good at this," Emma said eventually. "Teaching, I mean. You explain things better than my actual calc teacher." "I like when problems have clear solutions." Yeah, but you're patient about it. Most adults get frustrated when I don't understand something immediately. Emma was working through a particularly complicated problem, her tongue sticking out slightly in concentration. Thanks for staying. I know you probably have more important stuff to do. This is important. It's just homework. No, I mean, Victoria gestured vaguely at the house, at Emma's homework, at Daniel sleeping peacefully for the first time since the hospital. This, being here, it matters. Emma looked up, something vulnerable flickering across her young face. It matters to me, too. Having you here, I mean. Dad tries, but he's been doing everything alone for so long. It's good to have help. The words landed with unexpected weight. Victoria realized Emma wasn't just talking about the past few days. She was talking about years of watching her father carry everything himself, of being the reason for his sacrifices without being able to ease the burden. Your father loves taking care of you, Victoria said gently. It's not a burden to him. I know, but it's still lonely sometimes, for both of us. Emma went back to her problem, but her voice was quieter. It's nice having someone else around, even if it's temporary. Victoria's chest tightened. Temporary. Of course it was temporary. She had a life in Chicago, a company to run, responsibilities that didn't involve small Kansas towns and teenage calculus homework. In 2 days, she'd go back to her penthouse and her meetings and the carefully controlled existence she'd built. The thought made her feel empty in a way she couldn't quite name. That evening, after Emma had gone to bed and Daniel was settled on the couch with a book, Victoria found herself standing at the living room window looking out at the quiet street. A neighbor was walking a dog. Someone's porch light flickered and went out. Ordinary moments in ordinary lives. You're thinking too loud, Daniel said from the couch. Sorry, I didn't mean to disturb you. You're not disturbing me, but you've been staring out that window for 10 minutes. Something on your mind? Victoria turned to face him. What happens after tomorrow? After tomorrow? When I go back to Chicago. When this, she gestured at the room, at him, at everything, ends. What happens? Daniel set down his book. What do you want to happen? I don't know. That's the problem. Victoria moved to sit in the armchair, her usual spot over the past few days. I came here thinking I was doing you a favor, fulfilling an obligation, but somewhere in the past 72 hours, something changed. What changed? I did. Or maybe I just saw clearly for the first time in years. She met his gaze. I don't want to go back to the way things were, but I don't know how to be different. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. What does your life look like in Chicago? Empty, efficient, and successful, and completely empty. The admission hurt, but it was true. I have a penthouse I barely live in, colleagues I don't actually like, meetings that accomplish nothing meaningful. I've spent 15 years building something impressive that doesn't make me happy. So change it. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple, just hard. Daniel shifted to look at her more directly. You think I didn't wake up every day for the first year in Kansas, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake? Questioning whether I'd thrown away my career for nothing? But I kept showing up, kept choosing Emma over everything else, and eventually it stopped feeling like sacrifice and started feeling like the only choice that made sense. I don't have an Emma. I don't have anything pulling me toward something different. Yes, you do. His voice was gentle but certain. You've been different here for 3 days. More present, more real. That version of you exists. You just have to choose to be her. Victoria felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back furiously. What if I can't maintain it? What if I go back to Chicago and fall into the same patterns? Then you course correct. Keep choosing different until it becomes natural. Daniel paused. Or you change Chicago. Make it look more like what you actually want instead of what you think you're supposed to want. I don't even know what I want. I think you do. You're just scared to admit it. The words hung in the air between them. Victoria sat with them, examined them, recognized their truth. She did know what she wanted. Had known since watching Daniel hold his crying daughter in a hospital room, since helping Emma with calculus homework, since making soup and monitoring medications and being present in someone else's life instead of locked in her own head. She wanted this. Connection. Purpose beyond profit margins. A life that felt like it meant something. I want to matter to someone, she said quietly. really matter. The way you matter to Emma, the way she matters to you. Then find someone to matter to. It's not that easy to just... Victoria. Daniel cut her off gently. You flew to Kansas in the middle of the night, took care of my daughter, spent 3 days as my nurse, and helped with homework like it was the most natural thing in the world. You already know how to matter to people. You just haven't let yourself do it consistently. Because I'm scared, she admitted. If I care about people, they can hurt me. They can leave. They can die in car accidents or get sick or just stop caring back. It's safer to stay disconnected. Safer and lonelier. You have to decide which is worse. He held her gaze. For what it's worth, I think you're braver than you give yourself credit for. Most people never even see the problem. You're already halfway to solving it. Victoria wanted to believe him, wanted to think 3 days in Kansas had fundamentally changed her, that she could go back to Chicago and build a different kind of life. But doubt crept in, familiar and persistent. What if I fail? She whispered. Then you fail, and then you try again. Daniel's voice was warm, understanding. That's what living actually looks like. Not perfect optimization, just continuous trying. Outside, a car drove past, its headlights sweeping across the living room wall. Inside, the house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft sound of their breathing. Victoria sat in the armchair, Daniel on the couch, the space between them somehow both vast and intimately small. Thank you, she said finally. For what? For trusting me. For letting me stay. For... She gestured helplessly. For showing me what actually matters. Daniel smiled. You showed yourself, I just provided the context. Still, thank you. They sat in comfortable silence after that, Daniel reading his book, Victoria just being present in the moment instead of planning the next one. It should have felt wrong, inefficient, like wasted time. Instead, it felt like the first real thing she'd done in years. The next morning, Victoria's phone alarm went off at 6. Her flight back to Chicago left at noon. She had 3 hours to pack, return the rental car, get to the airport, resume her normal life. She lay in Emma's guest bed. The girl had insisted Victoria take it while she crashed on the couch, typical teenage resilience, and stared at the ceiling, trying to summon the energy to move. Everything in her training said to get up, be efficient, stick to the schedule. But her body felt heavy, resistant, like it knew something her mind hadn't accepted yet. She didn't want to leave. The realization sat in her chest, uncomfortable and undeniable. 3 days ago, she'd come to Kansas out of obligation. Now leaving felt like tearing herself away from something she'd just started to understand. Victoria forced herself out of bed, showered, dressed in the clothes she'd been wearing for 3 days. When she emerged, Emma was already in the kitchen making breakfast. You're leaving today? The girl's voice was carefully neutral. My flight's at noon. Right, of course. Emma focused intensely on scrambling eggs. Thanks for staying. It helped. Victoria heard everything Emma wasn't saying. The disappointment, the resignation, the familiar acceptance of temporary people who showed up and left. The girl had learned not to expect anything different. Emma, it's fine. You have your life. We get it. Emma's shoulders were tight. Dad's doing better anyway. We'll be fine. I know you'll be fine. That's not... Victoria stopped, frustrated with herself. Can I ask you something? Sure. If I came back, would you want me to? Emma's hand stilled on the spatula. She turned slowly. What? I'm asking if you'd want me to visit again. Not because of an emergency, just because. Victoria felt absurdly nervous. I know I'm not family, and I know 3 days doesn't make us close, but yes, Emma's voice cracked. Yes, I'd want you to visit. Even though I'm annoying and controlling, especially because you're annoying and controlling, you're like... Emma paused, searching for words. You're like if Dad had a friend who actually got him, who understood why he made the choices he made. We don't have people like that. Victoria felt her throat tighten. I'd like to be that person. If you'll let me. Really? Really? I can't promise I'll be good at it. I'm still figuring out how to be in people's lives. But I want to try. Emma crossed the kitchen and hugged her, quick and fierce. Okay, yeah, try. Daniel appeared in the doorway, moving more easily now, the bandages on his hands reduced to simple gauze wraps. Did I miss something? Victoria's coming back to visit, Emma said, pulling away and wiping her eyes. Like, on purpose. Not because of emergencies. Daniel looked at Victoria, something warm and complex in his expression. Is that right? If that's okay with you. More than okay. His voice was quiet. You're always welcome here, Victoria. The words settled something in her chest, made the decision she'd been circling feel solid and real. She wasn't walking away from this. Whatever this was, friendship, connection, the first real human relationship she'd built in years, she was choosing to keep it. Good, Victoria said, because I think I'm going to need help figuring out how to live differently. And you seem to have that part down. Daniel smiled. We all need help sometimes. That's not weakness. It's just being human. Victoria left for the airport an hour later, Emma's hug still warm on her shoulders, Daniel's words echoing in her head. As the rental car pulled away from the small house with peeling paint and cheerful yellow flowers, she looked in the rearview mirror and saw them both standing on the porch, waving. She waved back, something tight and painful loosening in her chest. For 15 years, Victoria Hale had been running toward success and away from everything that made her vulnerable. She'd built walls and systems and carefully controlled an existence designed to prove she didn't need anyone. And in 3 days in Kansas, all of it had started to crumble. But this time, the crumbling didn't feel like destruction. It felt like finally, after all these years, she was breaking ground on something worth building. The flight back to Chicago felt longer than it should have. Victoria sat in her Gulfstream's leather seat, the same seat where she'd once opened her laptop and researched Daniel Cross after their first encounter, and stared out at clouds that looked like they'd been painted by someone who'd run out of imagination halfway through. Her phone buzzed constantly. Marcus with updates, her assistant with scheduling conflicts, board members wanting her opinion on the Singapore presentation. She answered them all mechanically, her brain going through the motions while her chest felt hollow. 3 days. That's all it had been. 72 hours in a small Kansas town, and somehow it had rewired something fundamental in how she saw the world. When the plane touched down at Chicago Executive, Victoria gathered her things and tried to summon the focus that usually clicked into place the moment she was back on familiar ground. Instead, she felt displaced, like she'd left something crucial behind and couldn't remember what it was. The drive to her penthouse took 40 minutes through traffic that made her jaw clench with impatience she hadn't felt in Kansas. Everything moved too fast here, too aggressive, everyone fighting for the same 6 feet of asphalt like it mattered who got there first. Her building's doorman greeted her with professional warmth that felt hollow compared to Emma's fierce hug. The elevator was silent and fast, delivering her to the 40th floor in seconds that felt both too long and not long enough. The penthouse door opened on perfection. Everything exactly as she'd left it, pristine, organized, utterly devoid of life. No textbooks scattered on tables, no dishes in the sink, no evidence that anyone actually lived here instead of just storing expensive furniture. Victoria set down her bag and stood in the middle of her living room, surrounded by everything she'd worked 15 years to achieve, and felt nothing. Her phone rang. Daniel. She answered before the second ring. Hey, you make it back okay? His voice was rough but stronger than it had been that morning. Just walked in. Victoria moved to the windows, looking out at a city that suddenly felt alien. How are you feeling? Better. Emma's making me rest, which apparently involves her controlling the remote and forcing me to watch terrible reality TV. There was warmth in his voice, affection for his daughter's tyranny. How's the penthouse? Empty. A pause. That's honest. I'm trying to be more honest. Victoria pressed her forehead against the cold glass. Daniel, I don't know how to do this. Do what? Live differently. I'm standing in my apartment, and it feels like I'm visiting someone else's life. Nothing here feels real compared to the past 3 days. That's because it isn't real. You built a showpiece, not a home. He said it gently without judgment. The question is what you want to do about it. Victoria stopped, the words catching in her throat. I want to matter to someone the way you matter to Emma. I want to build something that isn't just impressive. I want to stop feeling like I'm running a race I've already won, but can't stop competing in. Then stop competing. It's not that simple. Victoria, you run a $400 million company. If you want to change how you operate, you change it. You're the CEO. Who's going to stop you? The board, the shareholders, everyone who expects me to keep delivering the same results. Do they expect that, or have you just assumed they do because it's easier than trying something different? Daniel's voice was patient but challenging. What would happen if you actually asked for what you wanted, instead of trying to prove you don't need anything from anyone? The question hit harder than it should have. Victoria thought about her board. 12 people who'd supported her vision, who trusted her judgment, who'd made fortunes because of her decisions. When had she last been honest with them about anything that mattered? I don't know, she admitted. Then find out. You've got a board meeting tomorrow, right? Try telling them the truth for once. The truth being what? That I'm having an existential crisis because I spent 3 days in Kansas? The truth being that you're rethinking how you measure success. Daniel's voice softened. They might surprise you, Victoria. People usually do when you give them the chance. After they hung up, Victoria stood at the window until the city lights blurred into streaks. Then she opened her laptop and started writing notes for tomorrow's board meeting, her fingers moving faster as ideas crystallized into something that felt both terrifying and inevitable. The next morning, Victoria walked into Hale Dynamics' boardroom wearing the same suit she'd worn to 100 previous meetings. But something in her posture was different, less armored, more present. The board members looked up from their phones and tablets, offering the usual greetings. Marcus was already there, setting up the presentation for Singapore. Everything proceeding exactly as planned. Before we get to the regular agenda, Victoria said, remaining standing instead of taking her seat, I need to talk to you about something. 12 pairs of eyes focused on her. The room went quiet. For the past 15 years, I've run this company with one goal: maximizing growth and profitability at all costs. We've been extraordinarily successful by those metrics. Stock price up 400% since IPO. Revenue growth averaging 28% annually. Industry-leading margins. She paused, meeting each board member's gaze. And I'm tired. A ripple of surprise moved through the room. Marcus looked alarmed. Not tired of the work, Victoria continued. Tired of the cost. I've sacrificed every relationship, every personal priority, every moment of rest in service of those numbers. And last week I spent 3 days helping a friend recover from an injury, and I realized I've been measuring the wrong things. Victoria, one of the board members started, but she held up a hand. Let me finish. I'm not quitting, I'm not selling, but I am proposing we fundamentally rethink how we define success for this company. She pulled up a document she'd worked on until 3 a.m. What if instead of purely focusing on quarterly earnings, we measured employee satisfaction, work-life balance metrics, community impact? What if we built a company where people actually wanted to work instead of one where they felt trapped by golden handcuffs? The silence was deafening. Finally, Richard Chen, her longest-serving board member, spoke. You're talking about a complete strategic pivot. I'm talking about building something sustainable instead of something that burns people out. Victoria's voice was steady. Including me. I can't keep operating at this pace, and I don't think I should have to choose between being good at my job and having an actual life. This is about the aerospace engineer, isn't it? Marcus said quietly. The one in Kansas. Victoria met his eyes. Partially. He made me realize that walking away from everything isn't the only option, but neither is sacrificing everything for work. There has to be a middle ground. The shareholders will revolt, another board member said. If we start prioritizing employee satisfaction over profitability, we're not choosing one over the other. We're integrating them. Victoria pulled up another slide showing research she'd compiled. Companies with high employee satisfaction actually outperform their peers long-term. Lower turnover, higher productivity, better innovation. We've been optimizing for quarterly results and leaving value on the table. The discussion went on for 2 hours. Some board members were skeptical, others were intrigued, but nobody dismissed her outright, and by the end, they'd agreed to a pilot program, restructuring 3 departments with new metrics around sustainability and work-life balance, measuring results over 6 months. It wasn't a revolution, but it was a start. Marcus caught her arm as everyone filed out. Are you okay? That was unexpected. I'm better than I've been in years, Victoria said honestly. Still figuring things out, but better. Does this have anything to do with why you're blocking off the second Friday of every month as unavailable? Victoria smiled. I'm visiting friends in Kansas. It's non-negotiable. Marcus studied her for a long moment. Good. You've needed friends for a while now. I just never thought you'd admit it. Over the next 3 months, Victoria learned what it felt like to build a life instead of just a resume. The pilot program at Hale Dynamics showed promising early results. Employee satisfaction up, sick days down, 2 innovations from teams that previously had been too burned out to think creatively. The Singapore presentation went well, even though she'd cut it from 3 days to 1 and spent the extra time actually seeing the city instead of locked in conference rooms. And every second Friday, she flew to Kansas. The first visit, she'd been nervous, uncertain of her welcome beyond the crisis that had brought them together. But Emma had grabbed her bag the moment she'd walked in, chattering about calculus and college applications. And Daniel had smiled from the kitchen where he was making dinner like her presence was the most natural thing in the world. By the 3rd visit, Victoria had her own coffee mug in their cabinet. By the 5th, Emma was texting her about homework during the week. By the 7th, she and Daniel had fallen into an easy rhythm of conversation that felt nothing like the antagonistic encounters of their first meetings. You're different, he said one evening after Emma had gone to bed. They were sitting on the porch, drinking beer and watching fireflies in a way Victoria would have considered a waste of time 6 months ago. Different how? Settled. Like you figured out where you're supposed to be standing. Daniel glanced at her. It's good to see. I'm still figuring things out. The board's getting impatient with how slow the culture change is happening. And I still have moments where I want to just optimize everything and go back to what I know. But you don't. No. Because every time I'm tempted, I think about Emma showing me her college essays or you explaining some engineering concept, and I remember what actually matters. And Victoria took a sip of beer. You were right, about all of it. I was measuring with the wrong ruler. Took me 8 years to figure that out. You did it in 3 months. I'd say you're ahead of schedule. Only because you showed me the alternative. She looked at him, this man who'd walked away from everything to raise his daughter, who'd saved her most important deal and then tried to send her away because he didn't need her validation. Thank you for that. Thank you for showing up. Not just that first night in the hospital, but every time since. Daniel's voice was quiet. Em talks about you constantly. You matter to her. She matters to me too. Victoria was surprised by how much she meant it. Both of you do. Something shifted in the air between them, a recognition of feelings that had been building for months but neither had acknowledged. Daniel set down his beer, his expression careful. Victoria, I know. She cut him off gently. I know this is complicated. You've got Emma to think about, and I've got a company in Chicago, and neither of us is particularly good at relationships. I was going to say I'm glad you're here. Oh. Victoria felt heat rise in her cheeks. Sorry, I'm still not great at this. At what? Letting people care about me. Admitting I care about them. She forced herself to meet his eyes. But I do. Care about you. Both of you. And I don't know what that means or where it goes, but I wanted you to know. Daniel reached over and took her hand, his palm rough with old scars and calluses. I care about you too. Have for a while now, if I'm honest. Since when? Since you flew to Kansas in the middle of the night, even though you barely knew me. Maybe before that. He smiled slightly. You're stubborn and controlling and terrible at resting, but you're also brave in ways you don't give yourself credit for. I'm not brave. I'm just finally tired of being alone. Same thing sometimes. Daniel's thumb traced patterns on her wrist. I'm not promising this will be easy. Emma's my priority, always. And you've got a whole life in Chicago, but if you want to figure out what this could be, I'm willing to try. Victoria felt something warm and terrifying unfold in her chest. I want to try. They sat on the porch holding hands while fireflies danced in the darkness. Two people who'd built their lives around different definitions of success, slowly learning that maybe they'd been moving toward the same destination all along. The months that followed weren't perfect. Victoria struggled with delegating, with trusting her teams, with accepting that she didn't need to control every variable. Daniel had moments where old grief surfaced, where the loss of his wife hit fresh and he had to retreat into himself. Emma got into fights with Victoria about college choices, about curfews, about the complicated dynamics of having her father date someone for the first time since her mother's death. But they kept showing up, kept choosing each other even when it was hard. Victoria restructured Hale Dynamics around a new vision, one that valued sustainable growth over explosive quarterly returns, that measured success by employee well-being alongside profit margins. Some shareholders complained, others sold their stock, but younger investors saw the vision and bought in, and slowly, painfully, the company culture began to shift. She promoted Marcus to COO and gave him real authority instead of just titles. She moved her primary residence to Kansas, keeping the Chicago penthouse for business, but spending most of her time in a house she bought 2 streets over from Daniel's, close enough to be present, far enough to give Emma space to adjust. Daniel started consulting part-time for an aerospace firm that let him work remotely, using his expertise on projects that challenged him without consuming his life. He taught Emma to see her father as a whole person instead of just her caretaker, and he learned to accept help instead of carrying everything alone. Emma got into MIT with a full scholarship. Her essay about growing up watching her father choose love over ambition, moving the admissions committee to tears. The night she got the acceptance letter, all 3 of them sat in Daniel's living room crying, Daniel with pride, Emma with joy and terror. Victoria with the overwhelming sense of being part of something that mattered more than any deal she'd ever closed. "You're coming to move-in day, right?" Emma asked Victoria, her eyes still red. "If you want me there." "Of course I want you there, you're—" Emma paused, searching for the right word. "Your family now. Weird, bossy, controlling family, but family." Victoria pulled her into a hug, this girl who'd taught her what it meant to care about someone else's success more than her own. "I'll be there. Wild horses couldn't keep me away." Over Daniel's shoulder, she caught his eye. He was smiling, that quiet smile that meant he was exactly where he wanted to be. 2 years after that first storm-lashed night at Mercer Regional Airport, Victoria stood in Daniel's backyard watching him build a fire pit with Emma's help. They were arguing about the proper way to arrange stones, both of them stubborn and certain they were right, neither willing to concede. "You're going to have to mediate," Daniel called to her. "I'm staying out of it. This is a cross-family argument." "You're part of the Cross family," Emma shot back. "That ring on your finger says you don't get to opt out of arguments anymore." Victoria looked down at the simple silver band Daniel had given her 3 months ago in a proposal that had been more conversation than grand gesture. They'd been sitting on his porch, their porch now, talking about Emma's upcoming graduation and what came next, and he'd said quietly that he'd like her to be there for all of it, officially, if she wanted. She'd said yes before he'd finished the sentence. They'd married the following month at the courthouse with Emma as their witness, followed by dinner at the diner where Victoria had once tried to understand why Daniel had listed her as an emergency contact. No fanfare, no elaborate ceremony, just a commitment between 2 people who'd learned the hard way that the best things in life weren't always impressive from the outside. "Fine," Victoria said, joining them by the half-built fire pit. "Emma's right about the foundation stones. Daniel's right about the drainage angle. Compromise and stop being stubborn." "We're not stubborn," they said in unison, then looked at each other and laughed. Victoria watched them, these 2 people who'd let her into their lives when she'd had nothing to offer but efficiency and control, who'd taught her that success wasn't measured in quarterly earnings or Forbes profiles, but in moments exactly like this, arguments about fire pits and shared laughter, and the certainty of being exactly where she belonged. Her phone buzzed. Marcus with a question about next week's strategy session. She glanced at it, typed a quick response delegating the decision, and put the phone away. "Work crisis?" Daniel asked. "Marcus can handle it." "Look at you, delegating like a normal person." "I learned from the best." Victoria kissed his cheek, tasting smoke and sweat. "Someone once told me that you're either present or you're not. I'm choosing present." "Good choice," Emma said, fitting a stone into place exactly where Victoria had suggested. "Because we're having movie night after this, and you're not allowed to work through it like last time." "I wasn't working. I was answering 1 email." 17 emails, Daniel corrected. "I counted." "Traitor." "Husband," he countered, pulling her close. "Big difference." That night, after the fire pit was finished and the movie had ended and Emma had gone to bed, Victoria and Daniel sat on their porch in the quiet darkness. She'd long since stopped finding the silence uncomfortable. Had learned that not every moment needed to be optimized, that sometimes the best use of time was just being with someone you loved. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel asked. "How different my life looks than I thought it would." Victoria leaned her head on his shoulder. 2 years ago, if someone had told me I'd be living in Kansas, married to a mechanic, co-parenting a college student, I would have thought they were insane. Aerospace engineer, he corrected automatically. Former aerospace engineer turned consultant who still works night shifts at the airport twice a month because Dorothy can't find anyone else qualified. Fair. He kissed the top of her head. Any regrets? Victoria thought about her old life. The penthouse, the power, the constant drive to prove herself worthy of love she'd never received from her parents. She thought about the woman she'd been, standing in a storm-lashed airport dismissing a grease-stained mechanic as beneath her notice. That woman had been successful by every conventional measure, and absolutely miserable. No regrets, she said. Not a single one. Not even when I'm being stubborn about fire pit construction? Especially not then. She tilted her face up to kiss him properly. You being stubborn is what saved me. If you'd been reasonable and accommodating, I never would have learned anything. Glad my personality flaws are useful. They're not flaws. They're just you, and you're exactly what I needed. Victoria settled back against his chest, watching fireflies dance in the darkness. You know what's funny? I spent 15 years trying to prove I was worth something to people who'd never care. And then I met you and Emma, and you never asked me to prove anything. You just let me show up and figure it out. That's because worth isn't something you prove. It's something you have just by being human. Daniel's voice was quiet, certain. I learned that raising Em, she was worth everything the moment she existed, before she'd accomplished anything or proven herself. Took me a while to apply that same logic to myself, but once I did, everything got easier. I'm still working on applying it to myself. You'll get there. You're already most of the way. He paused. You know what I'm proud of? What? Emma told me the other day that watching you restructure your company taught her that it's okay to change your mind about what success means, that you don't have to stick with a path just because you started on it. Daniel's voice was warm with emotion. You gave her permission to choose happiness over achievement. That's a hell of a gift. Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. She gave me the same gift. Both of you did. They sat in silence after that, two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built something neither had been looking for, but both desperately needed. The fire pit Daniel and Emma had built still glowed faintly in the backyard. Inside the house, Emma's bedroom light was on, probably reading instead of sleeping, typical teenage rebellion that made Victoria smile. This was success. Not the quarterly earnings or the Forbes profiles or the crystal trophies collecting dust in a closet somewhere. This, sitting on a porch with someone you loved, knowing a kid you helped raise was safe in her room, having built a life that felt real instead of performative. I love you, Victoria said quietly. I love you too. Daniel pulled her closer. Even when you're being controlling. Especially when I'm being controlling. Yeah, he agreed. Especially then. 3 months later, Victoria stood in an MIT dorm room helping Emma unpack while Daniel argued with the RA about the fire code implications of the string lights his daughter wanted to hang. It was chaos, boxes everywhere, parents and students crowding hallways, emotions running high as families prepared to say goodbye. I think that's everything, Emma said, surveying the cramped room that would be her home for the next year. Are you nervous? Victoria asked. Terrified. Excited. All of it, at once. Emma sat on her bed, looking suddenly young despite her confidence. What if I don't fit in? What if everyone else is smarter than me? Then you learn from them. That's the whole point. Victoria sat beside her. You've got this, Em. You're one of the smartest, most resilient people I know. You have to say that. You're basically my stepmom now. I don't have to say anything. I choose to say it because it's true. Victoria put an arm around her shoulders. Your dad walked away from everything to make sure you'd be okay. You think he did that for someone who can't handle MIT? Emma's eyes filled with tears. I'm going to miss you guys so much. We're going to miss you too, but we're also going to call too often and visit when you don't want us to and embarrass you in front of your new friends. Promise? Absolutely. Victoria hugged her tight. You're stuck with us, kiddo. Success or failure, good days or bad, we're here. Daniel finished his argument with the RA. Apparently, the lights were fine as long as they were LED, and joined them on the bed. The three of them sat squashed together in the tiny dorm room, holding on to each other before the inevitable goodbye. I'm proud of you, Daniel said quietly to his daughter. So proud I don't even have words. Dad, don't cry. If you cry, I'll cry. Too late. Daniel wiped his eyes. You're going to do amazing things here, Em. Just remember to call your old man occasionally. And remember that you don't have to be perfect, Victoria added. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. You're already enough. Emma looked between them, her eyes red but her smile genuine. How did I get so lucky? Most kids get one parent. I got a dad who gave up everything for me and a stepmom who restructured her entire life because she learned what actually matters. We're the lucky ones, Daniel said. You taught me how to be present. Victoria taught me I don't have to do everything alone. We're all just teaching each other. They stayed until the last possible moment, until other families had long since left, and Emma gently pushed them toward the door. Victoria hugged her one more time, memorizing the feeling of this girl she'd grown to love like her own. Thank you, Emma whispered. For what? For showing up that night at the hospital, for staying, for teaching me that successful people can also be good people. Emma pulled back, smiling through tears. You changed our lives, Victoria, in the best way. The drive back to Kansas was quiet. Daniel held Victoria's hand across the center console, both of them processing the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Emma was launched, independent, ready for whatever came next, and they had each other, plus a life they'd built from scratch that felt more solid than anything Victoria had constructed before. What now? Daniel asked as they crossed the state line. Now we live. Victoria squeezed his hand. We work and build and show up for each other. We call Emma too often and visit MIT whenever she'll tolerate us. We keep figuring out what actually matters. Sounds good. He glanced at her, smiled. Think we can handle it? I think we already are. 6 months later, Hale Dynamics posted its annual report. Profits were down 3% from the previous year. Employee satisfaction was up 47%. Retention had improved dramatically. Innovation metrics were the highest they'd been in company history. Some shareholders complained. Others saw the long-term vision and bought more stock. The board unanimously approved continuing the pilot program company-wide. Victoria read the results from her home office in Kansas. A spare bedroom she'd converted into a workspace that had windows overlooking the backyard where Daniel was currently arguing with a contractor about the deck renovation. She could hear their voices through the glass, Daniel's expertise clashing with the contractor's experience in a way that would probably result in a better deck than either had envisioned. Her phone rang. Marcus. Did you see the numbers? He asked. Just finished reading. What do you think? I think we're building something sustainable instead of something explosive. I think employee morale has never been higher, and I think you were right to push for this even when everyone said it was crazy. Marcus paused. How does it feel? Victoria looked out at her backyard, at the man she loved building something with his hands, at the life she'd chosen over the one she'd thought she was supposed to want. It feels like success, she said. Real success. The kind that actually matters. Good. Because the board wants to discuss expanding the model to our international offices. They talked strategy for another 20 minutes, Victoria's mind engaged but not consumed, contributing ideas without needing to control every detail. When they hung up, she closed her laptop and went outside to where Daniel was measuring boards. How's the empire? He asked without looking up. Evolving, learning, figuring things out. She handed him a pencil he'd set down and forgotten. Kind of like us. Yeah. Daniel marked a measurement, checked it twice. Kind of like us. That evening, they video called Emma at MIT. She was stressed about midterms, but excited about her engineering project, talking fast about differential equations and material stress tests. Victoria and Daniel listened, asked questions, offered encouragement when she hit roadblocks. I've been thinking, Emma said near the end of the call, about what I want to do after graduation. Whether to go into aerospace like Dad or pursue something different. What are you leaning toward? Daniel asked. I don't know yet. But watching you guys, the way you both figured out how to make your work matter instead of just chasing achievement, it made me realize I don't have to decide based on what's most impressive. I can decide based on what actually makes me happy. That's exactly right, Victoria said. And whatever you choose, we'll support it. Even if it's underwater basket weaving, even then, though I'd question the market demand. Emma laughed, the sound bright and free, in a way that made Victoria's chest tight with love for this girl who'd taught her what family could look like. After the call ended, Victoria and Daniel sat on their porch watching the sun set over Kansas flatland. The deck renovation would start tomorrow. Emma would call again on Sunday like she always did. Hail dynamics would continue evolving. Life would keep happening, messy and imperfect and absolutely real. You know what I realized? Victoria said. What? For 15 years, I was trying to build a legacy, something impressive that would outlast me. But I was building it out of nothing that mattered. She leaned into Daniel's warmth. This is legacy. Emma going to MIT and knowing she's enough. You consulting again and using your gifts without sacrificing your life. A company that values people over profit margins. This is what lasts. Took you long enough to figure it out. Yeah, well, I needed a good teacher. Victoria tilted her face up to kiss him. Lucky for me, I found one. Lucky for me, you were stubborn enough to keep showing up until you learned the lesson. They sat together as darkness settled over the neighborhood. Two people who'd found each other at exactly the right moment, when both were ready to stop running toward the wrong things and start building toward what actually mattered. Victoria thought about that first night in the storm, standing on rain-slicked tarmac, watching a grease-stained mechanic fix her plane with casual expertise. She'd dismissed him then, seen only what he'd given up instead of what he'd gained, had measured him by her broken ruler and found him wanting. How wrong she'd been. Daniel Cross hadn't failed by walking away from success. He'd understood something most people never learned, that the greatest achievement wasn't power or prestige or proving yourself to people who'd never care. It was showing up for the people who mattered, building a life that felt real instead of performed, choosing presence over achievement. He'd taught her that. Him and Emma, both, had cracked open the armor she'd built around her heart and shown her what was possible when you stopped chasing and started living. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For trusting me with Emma that night, for letting me stay, for teaching me the difference between being successful and being whole. Victoria's voice caught. For loving me even when I was still figuring out how to love you back. Daniel pulled her close, his chin resting on top of her head. You taught me things too. That asking for help isn't weakness. That I didn't have to carry everything alone. That building a new life with someone didn't mean forgetting the old one. He paused. We saved each other, Victoria. That's what people who love each other do. In the house behind them, lights glowed warm against the darkness. Their house now, full of shared memories and arguments about fire pits and movie nights and all the ordinary moments that made a life worth living. Down the street, neighbors were settling in for the evening. Above them, stars were emerging in a sky that seemed impossibly vast compared to Chicago's light-polluted darkness. This was home. Not because it was impressive or strategic or designed to prove anything, but because it was real, messy, full of people who loved her not for what she'd achieved, but for who she was becoming. Victoria Hale had spent 42 years measuring success by all the wrong standards, had built an empire that looked perfect from the outside while feeling hollow within, had proven herself to everyone except the parents who'd never cared and the woman in the mirror who'd needed validation most. And then a storm had grounded her plane in a nowhere Kansas airport, and a grease-stained mechanic had fixed more than just her aircraft. He'd shown her what it looked like to choose love over ambition, presence over achievement, real connection over impressive isolation. The greatest success, Victoria had learned, wasn't building a $400 million company or closing impossible deals or earning recognition from people who didn't matter. It was sitting on a porch with someone you loved, knowing you'd be there tomorrow and the day after, building a life that felt true instead of performed. It was Emma calling from MIT to share her stress about midterms because she knew they'd listen. It was Daniel building a deck with careful hands that had once designed revolutionary aircraft systems and now built something smaller but infinitely more meaningful. It was learning that you didn't have to choose between competence and connection, between success and significance, between achieving and living. You just had to measure with the right ruler. And after all the years of chasing the wrong things, Victoria had finally found it, not in boardrooms or quarterly reports or Forbes profiles, but in a small Kansas house with peeling paint and yellow flowers, where a stubborn engineer and his brilliant daughter had taught her the most important lesson of her life. The greatest achievement wasn't power or prestige. It was building a life that truly mattered, with people who made showing up feel less like obligation and more like coming home. And for the first time in 42 years, Victoria Hale understood what success actually meant.